for me to open this interparliamentary session which the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Italian Chamber of Deputies promoted in order to discuss the future of the Western Balkans between multipolarism and the process of European integration. First of all, I would like to thank all those who are following us currently, who've connected through the web TV channel of the Chamber of Deputies, who can follow our work in English and also in Italian. I would like to greet all the ambassadors following us, the Italian ambassadors in the countries attending this meeting and the ambassadors of those countries in Italy. Now, for practical reasons, I'd like to ask everybody to turn off their microphones and turn them on only when you take the floor. First of all, I'd like to thank all my colleagues, the presidents of the Foreign Affairs Committees of the countries of the Western Balkans, of the European Union and other countries which have accepted our invitation. As you shall see from our proceedings, there's been a broad attendance for this meeting, and in particular I'd like to thank Commissioner Varhelyi and the representative of the regional European institutions who've accepted our invitation. Commissioner Varhelyi will be with us very shortly, as well as the representative of the European institutions, Secretary General of the European Diplomatic Service, Ambassador Sannino, as representative of the European Union in Bosnia and Kosovo. I'd like to start proceedings by giving the floor, actually by showing a video message from the President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, who has followed the preparation of our meeting. He can't be linked with us directly because there is a session of the European Parliament which he has to chair this afternoon, and so he has sent us a video message which we will now broadcast. Dear President Fassino, dear Piero, dear members, I'm very glad to be able to address your committee on an issue which is very important for us, the relationship between the European Union and the Western Balkans. The European Parliament is an active supporter of the enlargement of the European Union to all Western Balkan countries, from Skopje to Tirana, from Sarajevo to Podgorica, from Pristina to Belgrade. The future of the citizens of the region is in the European Union. Enlarging our union to the countries of the Western Balkans is, first of all, a matter of reconciliation of history and the geography of Europe, and we also need to be very clear that this enlargement is in our own strategic interest. Having a stable, prosperous, peaceful continent is an advantage for all European citizens, for our public opinion, and for our member states. Having said this, the process of enlargement must be based on compliance with the criteria for accession, as has been stressed in the new methodology for enlargement. The European Union has recently discussed the progress made, which was presented, and in our Foreign Affairs Committee, the Parliament, in our resolution, stressed areas where progress has been made by countries and those where further efforts are required. Reforms must be completed without losing sight of the fundamental values of the Union, which must remain the beacon for guiding all countries asking to accede to our European family. But the European Union has to live up to the progress carried out by the countries of the Western Balkans on their route to accession. And Parliament has given a favourable opinion on opening negotiations on accession for North Macedonia and Albania, and we're awaiting the first intergovernmental conferences with these two countries. Dear colleagues, As we're combating COVID-19, we're in a period of unprecedented challenges, both in the Union and in the countries of our neighborhood. The pandemic has tested our resilience and has shown us all that the only exit from this crisis is solidarity. The European Parliament has been very clear from the outset, from the beginning of the pandemic. This solidarity should be extended to our closest friends and to our nearest neighbors, including, of course, the Western Balkans, which have a special place. The European Union has offered considerable financial support to these countries to face the health crisis and to mitigate its economic and social consequences. The economic investment plan for the region is key for economic recovery, and also the delivery of vaccines funded by the European Union is being stepped up, and this will continue in future months. Last year, this year again, we've shown to be the most reliable partner for the Western Balkans. I'm truly convinced that parliaments may and should play a key role in building social consensus for enlargement. We need the support of our public opinion. This is the reason why I'm very glad to see this event taking place through cooperation with the assemblies of the candidate and potential candidate countries. We can all contribute actively to reduce tension in the region and to make our and also involve our companies and our institutions. I intend to have a second summit this year between the European Parliament and the presidents of the parliaments of in the Western Balkans. Last year it was a success, and we wish to repeat this meeting. The European Parliament wishes to remain a reliable partner side by side with the candidate countries. Enlargement is one of the most important achievements of the European Union. We want to work hard and keep this going, and I hope for a fruitful discussion among you, hoping to meet you as soon as possible.
Grazie.
Thank you very much to President Sassoli for this video message, which confirms the commitment of the European Parliament to follow the issue of the enlargement of the Parliament to the Western Balkans as one of the priority issues. I'd like to remind you that on a regular basis, the Parliament approves resolutions on the state of progress of relations between the European Union and countries of the Western Balkans. In March, a number of significant resolutions were approved, which bear witness to the determination and will of the European Parliament to accompany and support the process of enlargement. Before beginning our proceedings, we have a message from the President of the Italian Chamber of Deputies, which is hosting us this afternoon. An important session of the Chamber of Deputies is envisaged with the President of the Italian Prime Minister to examine the use of the recovery fund. So it's a very important meeting. That's why Mr. Fico is involved in preparing this meeting, has sent us this message, which now we'll listen to. Good afternoon. I'd like to greet all the participants in the Inter-Parliamentary Conference on the Western Balkans, promoted by the President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Italian Chamber of Deputies, Piero Fassino. I'd like to greet the Commissioner for Enlargement and the Neighbourhood, Oliver Varhelyi. It's an opportunity to continue a dialogue at the political level and to intensify cooperation between countries in a crucial area of our continent, a continent which is a geographical and political hinge between Northern Europe and the Middle East and between the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe. It's important for our assemblies to exchange views on issues of common interest in strategic areas for stability and social and political progress as infrastructures, energy, transport, and also combating terrorism and organized crime. The Italian Parliament historically has supported and continues to support the full integration of Western Balkan states into the European Union. We're convinced that the destiny of the entire region cannot be separated from that of other European countries, because the Balkans are Europe. They're a full part of the history and the civilization of Europe. Faced by migration, climate change, or the pervasive presence of transnational crime and terrorism, we can provide valid answers only from a multilateral perspective. And for we Europeans, this requires a continental integration to be completed. Certainly in recent years, major progress has been achieved in various areas. One which is useful as a testbed for broad cooperation. Interparliamentary fora for discussion are the best instruments for countries to become closer, and also for the entities within them also to approach. We also need to recognize that the turbulence in the European Union has slowed down the entry of Balkan countries with clearly visible negative consequences. I'm convinced that we need to relaunch the progressive unification of Europe with the inclusion of the countries of South and Eastern Europe, a process which requires deep-reaching internal reforms in order to reach these standards which have been established by the Union. Of great importance in this context are measures to strengthen the rule of law, an area where the Italian Parliament has always provided its input on the basis of its experience. We are aware that the efforts required will also require demanding choices. I'm sure that this conference will be an important contribution to broader analysis on these themes, and therefore I wish you a very fruitful meeting. Thank you. Very well, we've listened to the message of the President of the Chamber of Deputies, who has confirmed, as you know, the commitment which Italy has with regard to the enlargement of the European Union to the Western Balkans in view of the historical relations which link our country to the Western Balkans. But in any case, we decided to call this meeting, and I'd like to thank all the presidents of the Foreign Affairs Committees who've accepted our invitation, because we consider the issue of the Western Balkans an issue which is a strategic priority, not just for our country, but for the whole of Europe. We believe that it is necessary to step up this process, which has already been very lengthy, and if it is too long, it may frustrate expectations and run the risk of all tensions re-emerging. When 26 years ago, with the Dayton Peace Accord, the Balkan Wars ended, the international community indicated that integration into the Euro-Atlantic structures was essential in order to give stability and security to the Balkans and the countries which arose from the ashes of Yugoslavia. This is something which was endorsed by the European Union with the European Council meeting of Thessaloniki, and which was repeated up to the Declaration of Sofia 2018 and Declaration of Zagreb 2020. The entry of Slovenia and Central European countries in 2004 aroused expectations of rapid integration in the Balkan countries. This was also fueled by the decision of NATO to open its doors to some countries in the region. As we know, 5 countries in the region are already members of NATO. However, things turned out differently. The economic crisis which hit Europe from 2008 to 2015 and the great turbulence in the European Union in these years with Brexit and the differences of views on budgetary issues among European countries, thinking of the crisis in the Ukraine or migration emergency, have slowed down the entry of Balkan countries into the Union. Certainly in these years, There have also been actions which have constantly reiterated the importance of the integration of the Balkan countries, and policies have also been deployed for regional cooperation. I'm thinking of the Central European Initiative, the Ionian Adriatic Initiative, thinking of USA, and the Berlin Process, all initiatives aimed to prepare the process of integration. However, I believe, and we should be aware, that 26 years have elapsed since Dayton and 18 years from Thessaloniki, and it would be a mistake to underestimate the feelings of disappointment and frustration which build up over time. In these, currently, an anonymous non-paper is circulating in our European countries which suggests doing away with the delicate balances post-Dayton, exchange territories and draw new boundaries, re-delivering the Balkans to those nationalisms which already produced so much tragedy in those lands. Nobody has claimed the authorship of that document. That's already significant. But it's also significant that that document was circulated. And I believe that we should take it as a warning signal. For centuries, we know the history of the Balkans. Each Balkan people has thought of its future against its neighbor. European integration provides the possibility of overturning this approach, calling all nations in the Balkans to build their future not against, but with their neighbors. Thanks to the integration in Europe, Serbia today can link itself to Europe, healing the wounds of 1999. Thanks to European integration, Skopje and Athens have put an end to a conflict which had lasted for 30 years. And we believe that in the same direction, thanks to European mediation, Pristina and Belgrade will be able to normalize their relations. And European integration is essential to allow Bosnia-Herzegovina to consolidate its its multi-community state identity, which is always exposed to risks of separation, as we know. Not just this, but thanks to the request of the European Union, the prospects of integration, all the countries in the region are impelled to carry out reforms on the rule of law, independence of the judiciary and of information, combating corruption, protecting minorities, which are reforms necessary to overcome the often bitter conflicts which are a problem in the domestic political life of those countries. However, this could all be rendered vain if we do not give any certain time frame for the process of integration. We therefore need a change in our speed, and we need to accelerate the process of integration of the Western Balkans with a roadmap which envisages the recommencement of the negotiations begun with Montenegro and Serbia, convening intergovernmental conferences with Albania and Montenegro, overcoming the vetoes set by Bulgaria, the recognition of the candidate status of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the indication of a prospects for Kosovo. So a change in speed is necessary, particularly in view of the challenges which European Union and the Balkans have before them. I'm thinking of COVID-19, and to defeat COVID-19, the Western Balkans must be a full part of the European space for provision of vaccines, something which has not yet occurred. At a time when the European Union has given itself a general extraordinary vaccination plan, it must include in this plan the Western Balkans too. European programs on green economy, digitalization, research, innovation, modernization of infrastructures on which the recovery plan is based and on which the European Union has put a priority in order to start up the economies which have been held up by COVID-19. These programs must be programs which must also involve the economic recovery of the Western Balkans, in the same way that the new pact for immigration and asylum, which was suggested by the President of the Commission, von der Leyen, to overcome the Dublin regulation and to manage migration with more effective policies. This new pact must also involve the countries of the Western Balkans, allowing them to exit the drama of the Balkan route. I would also like to remind you that the great turbulence in the eastern Mediterranean, which is the sea, which bathes the Balkans, and the growing presence of the region of other international actors, such as China, Russia, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, require full involvement of the Balkans in the foreign and security policy of the European Union. So much so that the choice of President Biden to relaunch a solid transatlantic relationship also requires acceleration of the integration of the Balkans in order that the Western Balkans be fully a part of a new season of relations between Europe and the United States. And all this makes it clear that the conference on the future of Europe, which will start on 9th of May, should fully involve the governing classes and the public opinions of the Western Balkans, making them therefore feel, in this process of redefinition of the prospects of the European Union, making the Western Balkans feel a full part of the European Union. These are the topics which are before us, and
E tra poco sentiremo.
In a moment we will be listening to Commissioner Varhelyi and Ambassador Sannino, and they concern the European governments, but also the parliaments. We know that there is a space, a role, a function of parliamentary diplomacy and interparliamentary dialogue, which is just as important as the government activity and intergovernmental activity. And our conference is a conference of presidents of the Foreign Affairs Committees of Parliaments, has the significance of intending to bear witness to the commitment of our parliamentary institutions in supporting the process of inclusion and European integration of the Western Balkan countries, making the Balkans increasingly be subjects and actors in the process of unification of the European continent, which from 1999 we are pursuing, making Europe a single great space founded on values of peace, freedom, democracy, social justice, and gender equality and human promotion. I wish to thank you for having allowed me to indicate the topics of this meeting. We'll be listening to everybody now, and I'll give the floor to the European Commission for Policy of Neighbourhood Enlargement, Oliver Varhelyi, and I would like to thank him for having accepted our invitation. I know that Commissioner Varhelyi has very busy schedule, and I'd like to mention to our colleagues that this conference comes at a very good opposite time, because next week there will be a very busy schedule in meetings of the High Commissioner, Commissioner Varhelyi, and other representatives of the European institutions with representatives of the Balkan countries. Today in Brussels, an important Serbian delegation guided by President Vučić will be, in a few days' time, be in Brussels. There will be a delegation from Kosovo, guided by Prime Minister Kurdi, and there will be other meetings which have been planned. So our meeting comes at a very important time when the Balkans are in the sights of the Commission. So Commissioner Varhelyi has a very busy schedule, and we would like to thank him particularly for having devoted his attention to us, and I give him the floor. You have the floor, Commissioner.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Fassino, I'm very glad to see you, although I would have wanted to see you in person in Rome, but hopefully next year, this time, we should all be meeting in the chambers in Rome. So honorary members, thank you very much for the opportunity to address this interparliamentary workshop today. And let me start with a bold statement that I think we all share, which is that it is the European future, it is the European Union which is the future for the Western Balkans. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The political and economic logic that underpins the European Union applies also to the Western Balkans. The COVID-19 pandemic has clearly demonstrated how closely interconnected we are. It also demonstrated that we can only overcome challenges together. There have been many strong signs of cooperation and solidarity since the last spring, going both ways. I recall, for example, Albania sending doctors and nurses to Italy to help to fight the pandemic. And I also recall the EU immediately launching 3.3 billion euros of support package for the entire region. And later in the year, a very robust economic and investment plan to support their recovery. We have also been working very hard on providing vaccines to the region. To tell you the latest news. And this has proved, unfortunately, more challenging than we have had initially hoped. But I'm very pleased to announce that we have agreed a mechanism to donate 651,000 doses of Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines to the region over the coming months. These will come in addition to the COVAX mechanism, to which the EU is the biggest donor, and which has already delivered almost 300,000 doses of vaccines to the region. All this demonstrates that the EU treats the Western Balkans as privileged partners. But our goal is much more than that. We continue to strive for full membership, not only partnership. On the EU path of the region, there are challenges on both sides. Reforms in the Western Balkans have often been too slow, leading some EU member states to question the transformative power of the enlargement process. On the other hand, the EU has sometimes failed to respond when partners have delivered on reform commitments. To better deal with these challenges, we have revised the enlargement methodology. Our aim is to strengthen the credibility and the predictability of the enlargement process while adding dynamism and political steer, and of course, keeping the fundamentals at the heart of the process. The revised methodology is already reflected in the draft negotiating frameworks for Albania and Macedonia. Member states, however, have not yet reached an agreement, and discussions are continuing in the Council. We are supporting those efforts, and I hope that the first intergovernmental conferences can be convened as soon as possible, still during the Portuguese presidency of the Council. Both countries deserve this step as a recognition for the difficult reforms they've already delivered over the past years. On that note, I would also like to thank our Italian hosts for their continued and deep support for reforms. This is particularly true in the case of Albania, where Italy is a major provider of high-level magistrates and experts to support the vetting process of the judges, and where the Italian government and the Guardia di Finanza have been instrumental in the fight against corruption, organized crime, and money laundering. North Macedonia has also advanced EU reforms, in particular in the areas of judiciary, fight against corruption, and organized crime. It is important that both countries continue to keep up the momentum of reforms, which are first and foremost for the benefit of their citizens. We will also apply the revised methodology to Montenegro and Serbia, with their agreement and their political choice. This implies a more visible change for Serbia, with which the negotiations have been moving very slowly over the last year. The possibility to open clusters can bring more dynamism into the negotiations. Of course, the decision on opening clusters remains with the member states, but we need to chart an ambitious course ahead with the aim of opening all clusters as soon as possible. All this, of course, depends on conditions being met first. For both Serbia and for Montenegro, which has already opened all chapters, progress in the area of fundamentals will be essential. For Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have identified 14 key priorities for its EU path in our 2019 opinion on the membership application. As other countries before, Bosnia and Herzegovina will need to amend its constitution to comply with the requirements of EU membership. The European Union will continue to facilitate and contribute to these discussions together with our partners. For Kosovo, we look forward to working with the newly elected institutions, the new president, there's a new government, and a new assembly. We hope to see more political predictability and stability in the forthcoming period so that Kosovo can speed up the reform process, including in the rule of law and economic and social development. It is also crucial that Kosovo and Serbia seize the current window of opportunity to make progress in the EU-facilitated dialogue, which is of key importance for their European aspirations. I also want to recall the importance of visa liberalization. The Commission stands by its assessment that Kosovo has fulfilled all the conditions. However, as you know, a decision is still pending in the Council. We encourage Kosovo to continue building trust with the EU member states, including through bilateral channels. All of the efforts I have just listed are there to speed up the region's integration into the EU. They will only succeed if they are supported by strong parliaments. European integration is a social choice, and the path to European membership requires a broad social consensus. There is no better place to debate, to exchange ideas, and to reach that consensus than in parliaments. Let me now turn to the economic side. It is essential that we speed up the region's economic convergence with the EU. Positive developments in this field will also facilitate all other reform processes. These are areas where we can't wait for membership. In other words, early delivery in these areas could bring earlier preparedness for becoming a member. This is why we launched the Economic and Investment Plan for the Western Balkans. Its priorities were identified together with the governments of the region, and I would encourage them to make best use of the 28 billion euros package. With a mix of grants, guarantees, and preferential loans from international financing institutions like the EIB or the EBRD, the EU can offer the best possible conditions for major investments in the Western Balkans. This will help governments to get best value for money for future-proof investments. Investments in connectivity of transport and energy infrastructure, the green and digital transitions, and private sector development will help the accession process, boost growth potential for local businesses, and improve the lives of citizens. I'm encouraged by the constructive discussions the region is having on building a common regional market. Currently, the region suffers from economic fragmentation. A common regional market of 18 million people based on EU rules would be a game changer. We are talking about steps that will make life easier for businesses, such as removing work permits, free movement of people with identity cards, cutting bank fees for payments within the region, removing unnecessary compliance certificates for goods already checked. Ladies and gentlemen, these are processes that have the potential to transform the region. I would encourage you to follow them very closely and to debate them with your peers in the region. Interparliamentary dialogue can play a crucial role to facilitate compromise and help your governments advance on their European path. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie, Commissario.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And in particular, I wish to thank you because your remarks have been very concrete and thorough. You have highlighted the goals and the indications that are being followed by the Commission. This has been very useful for all of us, and I'm certain that it will provide us with food for thought for our discussion. I will now hand over to Ambassador Stefano Sannino. As you know, he is the Secretary General of the European Diplomatic Service, the European External Action Service. I have just been told that he is not yet connected with our meeting, so we'll begin with him. We'll hand over to him as soon as he manages to connect. So we can begin our discussion now. The first speaker will be the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Portuguese Parliament. You know that at the moment Portugal has the presidency of the European Union, so we thought that this would be the best way to start off the discussion. Sergio Sousa Pinto, as I said, who is the chairperson of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Portuguese National Assembly. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Honorable Piero Fassino. I do indeed thank you for the opportunity of promoting this important debate. I'd like also to greet all the other colleagues who are taking part on this discussion. I will just say a few words on behalf of my parliament. As you might be aware, last Tuesday, during an informal video conference of European Affairs Ministers, the Presidency addressed the current state of play on enlargement and stabilization and association process, as well as its intentions for the coming months. The hope is that by June, negotiations could be concluded on the instrument of pre-accession assistance. Hopefully, the European Parliament will move on to this issue before the start of the next presidency. The Portuguese presidency is also focused on the application of the revised enlargement methodology to the accession process of Montenegro and Serbia, as well as on the adoption of the general positions for negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. If everything goes as planned, we should be able to hold the first intergovernmental conferences with these countries before the end of June. We note that on North Macedonia, further dialogue is needed. Bulgaria's position appears to remain unchanged regarding the required fulfillment of the Good Neighbour Agreement, even though Vice President Maros Stekovic has stated that all conditions have been met. Regarding the parliamentary dimension as stated in the declaration by the parliaments of the trio presidency, we remain fully committed to the enlargement process for the Western Balkan countries. During the recent Interparliamentary Conference for the Common Foreign and Security Policy and the Common Security and Defence Policy, parliamentarians, including delegations from the parliaments of the Western Balkans, had the opportunity to attend a debate with the High Representative, Josep Borrell, where the ENP was discussed, as well as the relation between Pristina and Belgrade. We hope that parliamentarians from Western Balkan countries will continue their participation in events organized by the parliaments of the presidency, including our upcoming conferences on rural development and EU-Africa relations. As Alois Kovska, President of the National Council of our trio partner Slovenia, correctly noted during the signing of the declaration, Western Balkan countries cannot be placed indefinitely in a waiting room. In 2003, before the economic crisis, the EU issued a clear promise to all countries of Western Balkans that the doors would be open. 18 years later, by constantly moving the goalpost and establishing new criteria, Europe risks falling into a paradox where the pressure to reform increases instability in the candidate countries, and this increased instability eventually generates a feeling of insecurity within the EU that ultimately endangers the entire integration process. Dear colleagues, as we are all very much aware, other actors are active in the region. While we can now say that the current framework provides a well-measured, calibrated path to membership, if Europe does not find a way to accelerate the current enlargement process, it risks further instability on its borders. More must be done to provide a reasonable, realistic path to membership, including perhaps setting specific accession dates for each country. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Grazie Presidente, io raccolgo esattamente le sue ultime parole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As you just said, we cannot just keep waiting. We need to have a clear-cut timetable. It might be a very difficult process, but we need to be certain as to the timing, because when you have a goal, you do your utmost to achieve your goal. The absence of a goal, as you've rightly pointed out, runs the risk of having frustrations and disappointment. So I do agree with what you've just said. The Portuguese presidency is engaged, is committed, and during its semester of presidency, it will call the intergovernmental conferences for Albania and North Macedonia, and it will resume negotiations with Serbia and Montenegro following the new methodology. Now, to be consistent with what you've said, I will now hand over to the chairperson of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Slovenia. This is the country that will take over the presidency after Portugal. So we have Madam Monica Gregorčić, as I said, who is the chairperson of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Državni Sabor, the National Assembly in Slovenia. I will hand over the floor to her.
Thank you for the floor, Honorable Mr. Fassino, dear colleagues and distinguished guests. Thank you very much for inviting Slovenia to your today's discussion on the Western Balkans. As you may know, Slovenia is the next to take over the presidency of the Council of the European Union. We are geographically very close to the region, and we have historic ties and also dynamic economical cooperation. So therefore, we find stability, prosperity, and progress of the West Balkan region also in our Slovenia's strategic interests. And we keep emphasizing that stability and prosperity of the region are essential, not only for the region, but for the Europe as a whole. Of course, the countries in the region are responsible for shaping their own future, and the EU cannot dictate their fate. But we can all encourage them to make progress by addressing the region's political and security challenges. I would like to emphasize 4 important things. Firstly, in Slovenia, we strongly support all the efforts that will help overcome existing tensions in the region. We believe that strengthening good neighborly relations, addressing the remaining issues, and much needed reconciliation is crucial. Therefore, I must emphasize that territorial integrity and international agreements must be respected. This is the only way to guarantee peace, stability, and progress in the region. So please allow me to stress once again, Slovenia is not involved in any kind of attempts to change national borders in the West Balkan, including this last non-authorized so-called non-paper. We are all aware that even theoretical insinuation on such an issue can be very dangerous and can have irreversible consequences on many different levels. Secondly, Slovenia is convinced that a credible EU enlargement process driven by objective criteria is the most effective way to ensure stability. The European perspective of the region is a powerful motivation for the West Balkan countries, for them to encourage them to continue with necessary transformation processes, as well as with the implementation of the reforms. And a credible enlargement process can give the region an additional but necessary push to foster economical growth that stimulates investments and promotes rule of law. Thirdly, we really regret that the current enlargement dynamics has not been sufficiently encouraging states of the region. The enlargement process is in a stalemate, primarily due to the non-adoption of negotiation frameworks for North Macedonia and Albania. I'm sure that a coordinated and coherent approach is needed immediately. Moreover, intergovernmental conference and the actual launch of negotiations with both countries should be started without further delay as well. So here I completely agree with the previous speaker, my Portuguese colleague. Number 4, the enlargement process should be a strategic decision and of great importance for security and stability of the EU and of the region. It will enable spreading European democratic values and also limit the impact of other global and regional players in the area. Therefore, enlargement process should be reinvigorated, not only with the candidate countries, but with all those countries in the region that aim to join the EU. It's also important that the EU actively supports the bridging of the development gap in the region. A new circumstance appeared in 2020. The region, as all the other world, has been seriously hit by the COVID-19, and the EU is aware of the responsibility to help countries, and the support of the EU fund of 3.3 billion euro will help the Western Balkans to deal with health crisis, as well to drive a socio-economic recovery, support business and investments. Therefore, it is obvious that the Western Balkans should remain very high on the EU agenda. And during our presidency, we plan to have a proactive approach by organizing the West Balkans Summit. Dear hosts and distinguished guests, let me conclude with the message that the EU needs a stable neighborhood. We are all aware that only this is possible by assuring a peaceful and prosperous future for the West Balkans. The unified and active EU approach is crucial and needed more than ever. In my opinion, it is necessary that the Western Balkan countries continue with their ambitions to become part of the EU. And at the same time, I would like to emphasize that this is also a decisive momentum for the EU member states to recognize the strategic interest of the region and to further promote European values. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie Presidente, grazie molte.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much indeed. We are counting greatly on the presidency of Slovenia. In fact, your engagement will be very, very important. We now have Ambassador Stefano Sannino. He's managed to connect. You know, he is the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, and I'm indeed happy to hand over to him because not everyone knows that Ambassador Sannino worked with me for 5 years. In fact, he was the head of cabinet when I was a member of government. I was fortunate enough to be able to work with him, and I know that he is indeed a leading expert on Balkan issues, and in fact, during his diplomatic career, he has focused heavily on this region. Over to you, Ambassador.
Non c'è niente, Sannino, niente?
No, c'è Antonione che vuole parlare.
Scusate, abbiamo...
I must apologize again. Unfortunately, we are having some technical difficulties. We will now, therefore, hand over to Roberto Antonione, who is the Secretary General of the Central European Initiative. You know that this initiative is a regional cooperation association of Southeast Europe, and the Western Balkans, of course, are part of this region. Therefore, Secretary General Roberto Antonione has the floor.
First of all, for the organization of this conference and for giving me the chance to add a couple of words on the role of regional cooperation in support to the European integration process of the Western Balkans. Let me stress something about regional cooperation that I consider an important tool to address common transnational challenges, thus enhancing cohesion and trust in specific sub-regions. I think we shall ask ourselves, what can we do to make regional cooperation even more effective? What can we do to increase its contribution to the goal we are all pursuing, a stronger and larger Europe encompassing the Western Balkans and playing an active role on the global scene? My personal view is that regional organizations are vital multilateral spaces to examine common issues that could not be solved by acting from a purely national perspective. In addition to supporting the confidence building, open discussions in multilateral fora, enable to co-generation of concrete projects to the ultimate benefit of our citizens. In this regard, interparliamentary cooperation represents a decisive asset since it helps spotlights the most pressing society's needs, calling for transnational action at regional level. We are all aware that to effective regional cooperation cannot limit itself to intergovernmental dialogue, but requires a more complex multi-stakeholder approach. We at the CEI try to align to this vision by promoting our personal brand of regional cooperation, which is based on two pillars. On one side, the identification of the clear political priorities through constant intergovernmental and interparliamentarian dialogue. On the other, the implementation of cross-border, interregional and transnational projects able to translate political priorities into cooperative actions involving multilateral stakeholders. We apply this methodology to a broad array of sectors and areas of cooperation summarized in the plan of action adopted by the CI governments. Among these, I would like to mention a recent activity we have launched together with the Adriatic Ionian Initiative and the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the topic of youth empowerment. More specifically, we have involved high school students of our member states in intergovernmental contest that will award prizes to local development projects designed in line with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations Agenda 2030. This initiative was built around our conviction that investing on empowered young citizens represents the best way to strengthen Western Balkan societies. We all know that brain drain and loss of human capital have a strengthening effect on the societies of the region. They make them weaker, and weaker societies are more vulnerable, and disinformation campaigns driven by competing regional and international powers. In this battle of narratives that is affecting the region, empowered young citizens are our strong ally to promote Europe values, thus helping strengthen societies and consolidate democratic institutions. Regional organizations are a useful platform to ensure that the development of those values through multilateral action and public diplomacy. Of course, this is not always an easy task. Going back to my previous question, what can we do to make regional cooperation even more effective? I do believe that interrelating our objectives and coordinating our agendas, exploring complementarities and avoiding overlapping would improve overall quality and impact of our work. And this will certainly contribute to the enlargement process and the successful integration of the Western Balkan in the European home. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie al segretario.
Thank you very much to the Secretary General of the Central European Initiative for making these points on the issue of regional cooperation. We now, I think, have a connection with Ambassador Sannino. I must thank him very much because I know that he has a very busy schedule today. Ambassador, the ambassador, as you all know, is the Secretary General of the European External Action Service. So he works hand in hand with the High Representative, Mr. Borrell, and he can therefore tell us what the High Representative is doing. And I just wish to remind you that he is indeed one of the leading experts on the Balkans. Thank you very much, Mr. Fassino.
Because as we speak, there is a lunch which is still going on with the President of Serbia, Mr. Vučić, and because this has been this is a very special week for the EIS concerning the Western Balkans. In this week, we will have apart President Vučić, we will have the Spendarovsky, and then Prime Minister Kurti, and all this leading up to a discussion of the Foreign Affairs Council at the beginning of May, when we want to, the foreign ministers want to restore new momentum in our relations with the region, and starting with the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina, but also, this is also very important, how to support North Macedonia and Albania in their continued commitment in the European path. And this is to say that the Western Balkans continue to be a strategic priority for the European Union, and that we have a shared interest in working together with them on the Euro-Atlantic path. We must continue reassuring the countries of the region that their futures lies within the European Union. We have repeated several times, we need to move more decisively in this direction, and looking also at the overall geostrategic picture, we really need to be careful of not leaving space and ambiguity in the way we want to work with them. The vaccine in the response to the pandemic and to the COVID-19 has certainly created a problem with them. It is true that we have been very active through COVID from the very start. We've been very present in the multilateral fora, but it is also true that the European Union as such has been more worried about its own situation, struggling with its own situation, and creating a preoccupation on their side about our willingness to be part of this process. We hope now that this is over. We hope that the flow can get into these countries in a much more steady way. And we hope that this can we can recuperate, let's say, the ground that we have lost up until now. It is important, and I want to stress this, the commitment that we are having vis-à-vis this region. I'm sure that Commissioner Varhelyi has spoken about the economic plan that we have developed with the Western Balkans, and this is certainly a very important element because this can be a game changer in the perception that the countries of the region may have about our engagement and our determination to be present, and how we can provide better living conditions for the citizens of the region. And this is something that we need to really keep in mind in trying to meet the expectations of the countries. We cannot hide that across the region, the confrontational political climate has had an impact on the economic situation. And from that point of view, and I'm not saying this because I'm in a parliamentary context, but it is true that parliamentarians in national as well as European Parliament can play an important role in helping and supporting the fragmentation that we are all witnessing in the region. There is also one element that I want to stress, and it is the alignment on the common foreign and security policy declarations of the European Union, where we expect that the countries of the region really join us in aligning their positions, those of the European Union, also because it's about sharing the values and sharing the vision that we want to build together. We also remain very strongly committed to supporting regional cooperation. I've spoken already about the importance of the economic plan. I want to mention also the common regional market, which can prepare the countries of the region for the EU membership and unlock the economic potential of the region. And we hope that the countries can look closely at the green and digital transformation. It's not easy. We understand that this is something which represents also an economic burden, but it's a strategic choice. And I think that, again, with our economic plan, we can contribute to this process and to integrate the Western Balkans into the mainstream when it comes to these two main policies. One last point, because this is very relevant for us, it's one of our main goals, is the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. You know that the Miroslav Lajčák, the former foreign minister of Slovakia, is doing good work in this perspective. We hope that we can soon restart the talks, and even if we are aware of the difficulties that this may entail, we hope that two leaderships in Belgrade and in Pristina seize the occasion and the opportunity to make a substantial step forward in this direction. Kosovo has a new government with a very strong majority, with the Prime Minister who has certainly the strength to move forward in the dialogue. And we are convinced that the dialogue can be key for both countries to advance in their respective European paths. It's a broad agenda. I don't want to forget two other countries that are relevant for us. Montenegro, which is our front runner in EU accessions, and we want to make sure that Montenegro sticks to its geostrategic choice. And Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is still in a not very easy situation. We have seen the complexity of the functioning of the state this winter during the humanitarian crisis. And we do believe that there must be an effort to move, as we say here in the AS, from Dayton to Brussels, and to think about the way to strengthen the governance of Bosnia-Herzegovina in general, and as a way to gain access to the European Union. As I said, all these elements will be on the table of the foreign ministers in May, and they will discuss also how, not only from the enlargement point of view, but also more generally and politically, how the European Union can continue keeping high the level of attention and commitment to all the region, knowing that the name of the game continues to be enlargement, and that the enlargement perspective continues to remain the main political driver for all these countries and for the European Union as well. Grazie infinite, Presidente, un grande piacere essere con voi questo pomeriggio.
Grazie, grazie Stefano. Grazie.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Ambassador Sannino, who I think confirmed what I had said at the beginning of our meeting, namely that the European Commission is actively committed, in particular the High Representative, to relaunch the Balkan dossier. And this, as I said, is a week of very important meetings between the High Representative and the representatives of Balkan ministers in view of the foreign ministers meeting of the Adriatic Ionian group. And Ambassador Sannino has given us further points to reflect on. Now we give the floor to the President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Albanian Parliament. As you know, Albania held elections yesterday. So I'd like to thank Ms. Kodeli for being available on a day which I'm sure is a very busy one because the day of the election results. And so thank you very much for being with us, and I'll give you the floor.
Grazie Presidente, infatti
non sono riuscita ancora a President, must say I haven't yet been able to go to sleep after 48 hours away.
Dear all, dear colleagues, dear Honorable Fassino, first of all, I would like to thank and congratulate our Italian colleagues for organizing this very interesting workshop to discuss on our region current and future situation, about our challenges between multipolarism and the European integration process. As you already mentioned, we are, just finished yesterday a peaceful and normal running of election process for the new Albanian parliament. So this workshop, it's very important because it's coming just after an important political momentum of us. And of course, it's a good moment to exchange views about what we can do, what can be exactly the role of the parliamentarian diplomacy in order to contribute to the solution of various problems concerning each of us and all of us together. The parliamentary diplomacy can play a very important role in the strengthening of the dialogue and cooperation, dealing with the difficulties and the challenges of our daily life, as well as with those to come in our projections for the future. For Albania, regional cooperation goes beyond the political will of good neighborhoodness. In this framework, we firmly support and promote the principle of all inclusiveness as one of the basic principles of the regional cooperation process. By implementing an active, moderate, and constructive regional foreign policy, Albania contributes inherently in the process of the regional cooperation. It acquires meaning through efforts for creating a common regional infrastructure, removing all non-physical barriers for the free movement of people, of goods and capitals, increasing exchanges, knowing each other better, and jointly committing to change the image of the region, to turn it into a very attractive and competitive market as well. Albania considers the regional cooperation as an essential element of the EU integration process for the Western Balkan countries. The European integration constitutes for all the countries of the region and the only perspective, while the integrating processes have provided us the tools and the opportunities to achieve these objectives. However, the EU stagnating in unfulfilled promises and actions is not replacing redoing or just facing as well as we would like to have to do with the Western with us, the Western Balkan regions, because our efforts and expectations are far more than that. So on the other hand, the long path of the EU accession process with the Western Balkans has also produced a new set of challenges, not only for the countries involved in the process, but also for EU itself as well. We all agree that still not all the Western Balkans area is organically included in the European structure, remaining so a factor of strategic ambiguity, since it constitutes a territory where the third actors see vulnerabilities and opportunities for penetration. The creeping nationalization of the enlargement policy has left an open door to the dangerous intrusions inside the empty spaces of us, left out of the European geographical structure. So Albania believes in a very positive approach to the enlargement of the EU with the countries of the Western Balkans that, first of all, further extends and consolidates the area of democracy, the rule of law, fundamental rights in Europe, and so forth. Second, offers the Western Balkans a common perspective and a real EU integration. That perspective has come to be very crucial, of a very crucial importance to ensure the much needed regional stability, resilience, peace, and prosperity. And third, drives to the mutual benefit of all of the Western Balkans and the EU, including not only the economic ones, but also and moreover the strategic and political ones, the geopolitical influences, and the internal and external security of the EU and of our region as well. We are aware that 2021 will not be easy for us, but the EU's focus should not be diverted from the EU perspective of the Western Balkan countries, starting with those that are right at the door, Albania and North Macedonia. And that perspective must feel real, tangible. Only through tangible prospects, rather than imaginary ones, which the average citizen of this region would feel and enjoy, can we be able to overcome obstacles, demotivation, fatigue, which tend to accompany the process and the inner reforms when the perspective does not feel as real as it has to. Our national consensus to advance in the EU integration remains firm, but the integration process is it's not a one player and no winner game. It must be a right balance between the expectations on one side and the ability to allow these expectations to be materialized on the other side as well. By ending, I should say that the EU made a commitment to Albania and North Macedonia in March 2020. We honored that commitment. Albania has fulfilled all the requirements of the March 2020 Council's conclusions, and in particular, the conditionality prior to the first IGC is met. So now the EU should honor its own promises and commitments. We welcome the decision of the EU Council to open a session of negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia, as well as the adoption of the Zagreb Declaration 2020 as a crucial milestone to respond jointly to the COVID-19 crisis and to confirm the EU perspective of the Western Balkans. Now we are impatiently looking for the Council approval of the negotiating framework for Albania, and as soon as possible, and the date for the holding of the first intergovernmental conference. So hopefully that will come in June 2021. Thank you for your patience and time.
Grazie Presidente. Sì, come lei ha ascoltato dal Presidente della Commissione.
President, as you heard from the President of the Portuguese Foreign Affairs Commission, what we are all trying to do is to get over the Bulgarian veto and to be able to convene this meeting before the end of the Portuguese presidency. Bulgaria's had elections. We don't have with us the Foreign Affairs President, Committee President of Bulgaria. But I do hope that when the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Bulgarian Parliament takes office, we can have contacts with the Bulgarian friends to convince them of the need to overcome this obstacle and make it possible for the intergovernmental conference to take place, to have discussions with Albania and North Macedonia. Now we have the President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Radski Sobor, the Croatian Parliament, David Borsir, and then it will be the President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the French Assembly, Boron. Thank you, President, for giving me the floor, and in particular for having organized this meeting.
There are three regional actors with distinct approaches to the Balkans. Obviously, the European Union, but also Russia and Turkey. And to them, we need to add the two global superpowers, the United States and lately China, which are also present with competing interests. For the European Union, the Balkans became one of the three policies applied to bordering regions. The other two are the eastern and southern neighborhoods. Yet the Balkan region counts on a specific distinction. It's the only one which was promised a perspective of full membership in the European Union. In the eastern neighborhood, the EU approach collides with Russia's near abroad geopolitical project, a project that does not intend to recreate the Soviet Union, but intends to establish a sort of a Russian sphere of influence on the borders of the former Soviet Union, so that no strategic decision in this vast area can be taken against the will of Moscow. And we see, of course, the application of this policy in Ukraine, in the Caucasus. With Erdogan, Turkey has also embarked upon a similar strategy of creating its own sphere of influence, of course, in this case on the borders of the old Ottoman Empire. And our Italian colleagues can witness the implementation of this policy, for example, in Libya. So both in its eastern and southern neighborhoods, the European Union is confronted with an assertive approach of its regional competitors, an approach which includes even the use of force. I mentioned the eastern and the southern neighborhood in order to highlight the different situation in the Balkans, but also to raise awareness of the geopolitical importance of keeping alive the European perspective for the countries in the region as the most effective policy for sustainable peace and stability. As the EU enlargement policy has gradually lost visibility and perhaps also substance, we agreed in the European Union to reform it during the Croatian presidency. Now, it's also a fact that the Russian and the Turkish presence in the region has increased lately. However, we also need to say that neither Moscow nor Ankara officially oppose EU membership aspiration of Balkan countries. For example, despite stressing the Slavic or the Orthodox links with some of the Balkan nations, Russia doesn't really include them in the near abroad. Its increased presence in the Balkans, in my view, serves more to prove Russia as a regional power which cannot be avoided in the security architecture of the continent. And at the same time, of course, when some of these countries from the Balkans manage to get into the EU, Russia counts on them as future member states favorable to Moscow's interests, a sort of a pro-Russian voice within the EU. And something similar can be said of Ankara's support for the accession of Balkan countries to the European Union, with the additional element, of course, that Turkey also supports the NATO accession. In this sense, it would be a mistake to portray the situation in the region as if Russia or Turkey offer to Balkan countries a strategic alternative to EU integration. The real strategic challenge is of a different nature, in my view. First, it relies on the question whether a candidate country is willing to align itself with EU rather than Russian or Turkish interests. Secondly, it refers to the ability of the EU competitors to exploit unresolved issues within and among countries in the Balkans to disrupt EU's policies and generally to disrupt Western interests and Western stance in the region. And thirdly, this strategic challenge comprises the temptation of a Balkan country to imitate the near abroad or the neo-Ottoman geopolitical project, developing an authoritarian regime, what is sometimes called also illiberal democracies, trying to establish its own sphere of influence. Of course, in this case would be along probably the borders of the former Yugoslavia, mainly building or rebuilding a hegemonic position over other former Yugoslav republics. Consequently, in our view, the EU should address these three strategic challenges. Firstly, by fostering and monitoring the alignment of candidates with EU interests and with EU democratic values. Secondly, by addressing, together with democratic allies, mainly the United States, the upstanding issues within and among countries in the Balkans. And finally, by impeding the rising of any country in the region to a hegemonic position. In order to achieve that, it's essential to strengthen the independence of every country in the region, especially that of Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. In pursuing such a policy, it would certainly be wise to develop also a substantial dialogue with Russia and Turkey as relevant regional powers, but always keeping a clear and firm position on the European perspective of the Balkans, including the full adherence of candidate countries to the European values. Insomma, signore Presidente, credo che con...
Mr. President, I think that with the support of the European Union, the Balkans have the possibility of changing from a conflict and confrontational area between great powers to an area of strategic cooperation. And here I stop, and I thank you again for the organization of the conference.
Grazie, Presidente Stier. Adesso diamo la parola al Presidente Bucchi.
And now we'll hand over to the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Assemblée Nationale in France, Monsieur Bourlange. As you know, he has a great deal of experience with European affairs. He was a member of the European Parliament, and he has acquired so much expertise. I do thank him for being with us today. Over to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you all hear me? I wish to thank you. I am not here to speak on behalf of the government of my country, but I, as my government, am in favor of the integration of the Western Balkans in the European Union. I think that there is no doubt about this. Now, perhaps it is not up to me to represent my government. I do not have this authority. I do thank Mr. Fassino for having organized this meeting so beautifully. Now, I am a true supporter of Europe, and I obviously am not involved in the first period of enlargement, and I think that there is an underlying question in our debate on the accession process and the negotiations process. We must wonder how this should be actually set up, what kind of methodology, in fact, is needed. This is the important question. Now, let me say something about accession. There are two false ideas that we have to get rid of, and there are three that are more authentic. The first is that the European Union is a club of richer nations. This is an idea that we have to do away with. In fact, we have to consider moral and political issues, and it is important to strengthen the cohesion policy. This is how we need to understand this issue. This is how we must realize that the more Europe is enlarged and strengthened, the more we can reduce inequalities and therefore support our territories. We must take this. We must therefore adopt this mindset. Now, we also know that Europe needs to mend some tears. We have had victims of violence over time. Well, no, the European Union is not an appellate court of the victims of the past. In fact, it is important to do away with these ideas of vengeance, as it were. And there have been horrors in the past, but we cannot overcome them by simply turning a new leaf, as it were. We must do away with this idea as well. Now, in this connection, I would go back to what Simone Weil said. He had lost his brother and father to deportation, and it wasn't a question of founding a political process on the idea of compensation that was to be sought, because that was impossible. So again, we need to build a future together where we do not repeat these horrors of the past. So if in the Balkans we don't admit that the European Union is a negation of this memory. Unless we have rules where we create a new kind of legitimacy, then it will not be possible to support this kind of European engagement. Now, there are three fundamental principles that are important now for the European Union. One is to recognize a moral identity, which is what the European identity has to be based on. In order to join the Union, of course, you have to be part of a geographical Europe, but we first and foremost must accept the fact that the system of values, the secular values, the liberal values, or in other words, the separation of spiritual and the intellectual, well, this is the system that will help us to acknowledge the identity of the people of Europe. Now, this we know is not automatic, and unfortunately, we have to struggle at times in some states in determining this founding principle. My second point is that the European Union is a method which is based on the idea that interests and the interests of each of us will be properly safeguarded only if the legitimate interests, the fundamental interests of others are also fully accounted for. Now, there is a false proverb which says that we have differences, and clearly in the European Union, we can say that egotism begins with others. In other words, unless you take into account the interests of your neighbors, you will never be at peace with them. So this is why this is so important. Otherwise, we will have an ongoing war, an interminable war. Now, this is how we've founded the French-German alliance, and we know that after 1945, it wasn't a question of punishing the Germans. It was a question of determining security, unity, democracy, and prosperity, because this is how we can hope to have a strong union. My third principle now is linked to an institutional pact. In order to be Europe, in order to belong to Europe, you must respect the sovereignty of states. In fact, the competence, jurisdiction, and the federal governance has to be safeguarded, and therefore democratic representation is such that all the states of the Union must be able, directly or indirectly, to govern their peoples. Now, there is a fundamental choice that we cannot escape. The Balkan peoples mustn't escape this either. Now, in a cohesion policy, we need a strong union. We need institutions that can decide on the basis of a qualified majority. This is the kind of spirit that we need, even with regard to Next Generation Europe, for example. Without all this, we cannot hope to improve cohesion, and we will be schizophrenic because we will try to return to sovereignty, but we will continue to promote and foster cohesion. Now, we need to reform the methodology that was proposed by France. I will quickly sum this up for you. In fact, this is the approach. The accession negotiations are such that the reforms must not be seen as a sacrifice, but as a way of achieving progress. So it is not normal for the benefits achieved are entirely dependent on the accession process. We have candidates that are on a sort of waiting list, but we have to help them to understand how they can start improving their situations and devising their reforms. This is how we can hope to support them, even with structural funds. Now, let me wrap up by saying this. The reform must be very rigorous indeed. We know that discipline is essential. This is absolutely what we needed. Now, the reform must be completed within a certain time frame. And we've seen throughout the history of the European Union that there have been backlashes. After the conclusion of accession agreements, there was a backlash, a considerable backlash of countries that wanted to accede, but which were unable to. And therefore, we have to be more generous with them and perhaps more rigorous afterwards. So before concluding, let me just say that in the enlargement negotiations, we had a number of waves. In the first two waves of enlargement, we supported a geographic enlargement and development of competences, the single market, internal market cohesion, and institution building, and the development of a qualified majority, the fiscal policies. So this is something that we've lost along the way. We need development. We need a profound process, because that way the Balkan states and the member states that welcome them will, in fact, make this process a positive one, a win-win game. And that way we will have a stronger European Union and not a more fragmented and divided Europe. This is how we can hope to be successful. So if we proceed this way, I think we'll all be proud and happy to be together. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie, Presidente Bourlange. Abbiamo, credo...
Thank you, Mr. Bourlange. We've appreciated your comments. You have a clear vision, and you've touched upon a number of points which I do believe have enriched our debate. Thank you so much for your contribution, Monsieur Bourlange. And now I will hand over to Žarko Obradović, who is the chairperson of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Narodna Skupština, the National Assembly of Serbia. I hand over to our colleague, Mr. Obradović, and afterwards, the chairperson of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Austrian Nationalrat, Pamela Rendi-Wagner. Mr. Obradović has the floor.
Distinguished Mr. Fassino, just a sec. Sorry, we have to interrupt just for a second. We have technical issues.
Organizovao ovu važnu konferenciju. Najpre želim da izrazim svoj protest činjenicom da je predstavnik...
Distinguished Mr. Fassino, Mr. Varhelyi, Mr. Sassoli, I'm sorry.
Koja će se usvajati.
Si fermi, Obradović.
Insistiramo
un attimo.
da Kosovo bude...
Non c'è traduzione, non c'è... Un attimo solo, ecco, si fermi un secondo perché non c'è traduzione.
Just a second, please.
Non abbiamo la traduzione, quindi l'intervento del collega Obradović rischia di essere ascoltato dai nostri colleghi. Che succede? Allora, mi dite qualche cosa? Un attimo. Direi di scusate un attimo, siccome abbiamo tutti i tempi molto stretti, Stiamo cercando di risolvere il problema.
I'm sorry, we have technical issues.
Scusate, chiederei al collega.
I would ask my colleague Obradovic to please be patient for a moment, and I will give the floor now to the chairperson, Madam Rendi Wagner, of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Austrian Parliament, while we're waiting to see whether we can receive the translation into English of Monsieur Obradovic. So, Pamela, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, let me thank you very much for this initiative to host this workshop on this really important issue. And I really appreciate, since this is an important sign to show that the Western Balkans are of strategic interest for the European Union. We all know that unfortunately, due to COVID-19, many important international issues don't gain the attention they really would deserve. And it is of utmost importance to bring the Western Balkans back on the agenda of the European Union. And therefore, Austria, together with other 8 member states, sent a letter recently to Josep Borrell to support this goal. I think you are aware of that. And for Austria, the Western Balkans are a priority for a long time. This is not new. This has a long history, and we strongly support, therefore, the accession to the European Union. The EU is the main political, economic, but also trade partner of the region. And for me and for us, the future of this region clearly lies within the European Union. Becoming member of the European Union is not just a decision. Becoming member of the European Union is a process. It's a process linked with important reforms. And one major challenge is, of course, to stabilize and to strengthen democracy, to implement the rule of law. Many and lots has been said before. And of course, to fight organized crime, to fight corruption. And these reforms are of interest of all citizens living in the Western Balkan regions, in the states, in the Western Balkan. And we know that social science studies also show that people living in the region clearly support all these reforms. The second major challenge we are facing is demography. It's the trend of brain drain from this region. We know that many young people think about leaving their countries, and I'm convinced that the European Union, us member states, we need to invest much, much more and contribute in order to create employment in the region of the Western Balkans. This young generation, they need perspectives, they need jobs, they need a chance on education and participation. And I think this is a very important investment in future. Last spring, we all know North Macedonia and Albania received the green light from the European ministers to start their negotiations. And the start of the accession negotiations, they should not be postponed any longer. This negotiation process should be clear, it should be transparent, and of course all countries that want to become member of the European Union clearly have to fill all the criteria. We are very clear on that. In generally, we support also the idea of a final document of this workshop. Unfortunately, there was not much time to discuss wordings and details of this joint declaration in detail. And regarding the new pact for migration and asylum, I think that I'm a bit skeptical about this, since the pact has not yet been agreed upon by all the EU member states. It has all details of this pact are not yet clear. And to my impression, it's a bit early to include a not yet decided pact in this final document. However, we support all the other points. We support the idea of the Western Balkan, which must be, of course, an integral part of the European vaccine supply area. And Austria has therefore been very active also in that way in the last weeks. And let me conclude. So I'm very much convinced that together we succeeded making important steps forward. And we together, we can support positive developments and reforms in all the countries there. And therefore, I think we will grow and our relation will grow and will be even stronger in future. Thank you very much for the initiative. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie Pamela. Sì.
Thank you, Pamela.
Lo statement finale di...
And at the end of this meeting, we refer to the proposal of the Commission on Immigration, which isn't a definitive proposal. Simply wish to express a hope that this European policy may fully involve the Balkan countries and not be a policy which excludes them or simply sees them on the sidelines. I think that's the critical concept. We need the Balkan countries to be a full part of the migratory policy. And this new policy is something to be discussed and defined. Now I'll give the floor to colleague Softic, President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Chamber of Representatives of Bosnia-Herzegovina. I think they're connected. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to begin by thank the Parliament of the Republic of Italy for the successful organization of this conference, and especially to Mr. Piero Fassino, Chairman of the Committee on Foreign and EU Affairs. The topic we are discussing today shows once again the importance of mutual communication and that it must not be absent even in such circumstances. There are two aspects that we should keep in mind when we talk about the role of the Western Balkans countries in the process of European integration. The first is readiness of the EU to support the countries of the region in their process of joining the EU, and the second one implies the readiness of Western Balkans countries to initiate and complete necessary reform processes. Bosnia-Herzegovina is aware of the importance of fulfilling the obligations undertaken and the reform process in its country because its own reform measures set the pace of EU integration. All institutions and relevant political factors in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in addition to the challenges they face, are united in the view that the future of our country is membership in the EU. We hope that the enlargement process of EU in the Southeast European countries is of equal importance to the EU in order to consolidate European territory as soon as possible and to strengthen security and stability in Europe. Bosnia-Herzegovina is determined to continue with the ongoing reforms based on its respect for European principles, democracy, and the rule of law and the protection of fundamental rights and human dignity. The priority of our country, as well as other countries, is to overcome the remaining conflicts, strengthen regional cooperation, and establish good neighborly relations. I would like to emphasize here the need for cooperation between Bosnia-Herzegovina and neighboring countries, but also with EU member states in areas of common interest, such as migration, the fight against terrorism and international crime, economic issues, and trade. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all expected to respect the existing international agreements and EU strategic documents with intensive use of existing forms of cooperation, such as Adriatic Ionian Initiative, Central European Initiative, as well as other No less important, initiatives in which we participate together. Every kind of polarization, whether regional or global, carries with it certain tensions that destabilize space, bring insecurity and uncertainty. Such negative dynamics further affect various forms of economic, political, cultural, and above all, social cooperation. When it comes to Bosnia-Herzegovina, our priority is to overcome the internal polarization, and a clear European perspective can help us the most. If there's certainty in our country that we will become part of the EU, it would be easier for us to accomplish realistic and achievable goals that lead to full membership. This kind of security and self-confidence would facilitate the organization of parliamentary action and enable the Parliament to become one of the important instruments for communication related to the acquis and the European path of BIA. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by reminding you once again of the need to strengthen regional cooperation in order to improve political and economic stability and create the conditions for faster EU integration of Western Balkan countries. Thank you for your attention, and I congratulate the organizers and participants on their constructive and productive contribution to this important topic. Thank you very much.
Grazie, grazie.
Thank you very much to Mr. Softi to underscore an important point for Bosnia. You said something which was simple but essential, and that is that European integration is the condition whereby Bosnia can maintain cohesion and unity and increase its internal integration as well, its domestic integration. You spoke about polarization, in fact, and the risks that Bosnia is running when these polarizations occur. Now, I think we've resolved the technical issue that we had with Serbia, so I'm happy now to hand over to the chairperson, Mr. Obradović.
Uvaženi gospodine Fassino.
Distinguished Mr. Fassino, distinguished colleagues, allow me, on behalf of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia, to greet all the participants in this conference, and in particular Mr. Piero Fassino as the chairperson of the Committee on Foreign and EU Affairs at the Italian Parliament, who organized this important conference. First of all, I'd like to object to the fact that the representative of the so-called Kosovo has the flag as the state sign in front of him. As for the conference, I'd like to extend gratitude to the Parliament, the government of Italy, that have this conference actually shown that the integration of the Western Balkan countries into the EU is at the top of Italy's foreign policy agenda. Presence of Mr. Varhelyi also confirms that the European Union also bears the European perspective for the Western Balkans in mind. Let me assure you that the Republic of Serbia sees its future in the European Union. A fully fledged EU membership is one of Serbia's key strategic goals, and we have proved that Serbia has administrative and other capacities for opening negotiating chapters and for stepping up its European integration process. Through its development and reforms, Serbia has shown to have the ability to reach the European standards. For the purpose of fighting against COVID-19, Serbia has adopted various measures, and Serbia has continued to fight against the new virus by vaccination of the population. We are one of the rare countries in the world that uses 4 types of vaccination: Pfizer, Sputnik, Sinopharm, AstraZeneca, and we have also enabled that our country provides a certain number of citizens from several countries in the region with the vaccines. We have donated several thousand vaccines to North Macedonia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albania. This is not for us the geopolitical issue. This is the proof that we want to support countries in the region to fight this virus together. In the field of economy, we have implemented deep reforms. We have established a stable economic system. Thanks to all these measures, according to the International Monetary Fund, Serbia achieved one of the best results last year. Thanks to these measures, in 2020, Serbia ranked among top European countries according to the economic growth, and the 6% growth has been envisaged for this year. Serbia is committed to improving regional cooperation. We have demonstrated this not only during the fight against COVID-19 by donating medical equipment and vaccines to the countries in the region, but also by participating in implementation of various regional projects. For example, we are a member of CEFTA and the Berlin process. We have also initiated signing of an agreement between Serbia, Albania, and North Macedonia on the establishment of the so-called mini Schengen zone for free movement of people, goods, and capital between these two countries. We have signed a Washington agreement with the USA aimed at not only improving the dialogue with Pristina, but also at the implementation of several transport infrastructural development projects. Serbia has shown readiness to talk about the difficult issues, including Kosovo issues. This is why we participate in the dialogue with Pristina, and this is why we have signed the Brussels Agreement. Serbia finds the implementation of all the agreements signed very important, notably the Brussels Agreement laying down the establishment of the community and Serbian municipalities. In my opinion, I believe that in the enlargement process, there has been a stalemate, and both sides are responsible for it. It is obvious that there has been a decrease in enthusiasm and support to EU integration among the citizens of the Western Balkans, and it has been affected by two factors. The first one is the length, of the story about the position of the Balkans in the European Union that has lasted for over 18 years now without results. The second factor, however, is unreadiness of the European Union to keep the enlargement issue high on its agenda during various challenges, such as the pandemic, the migrant crisis, and the Brexit. It is obvious that regulating relations among the member states inside the Union has an advantage over the accession of new members. Moreover, the EU itself lack action brings its credibility into question. For instance, almost 8 years ago, the EU guaranteed implementation of the Brussels Agreement. 8 years later, Pristina has not implemented its obligation yet, and the EU is not responding. I believe that the world has gone through drastic changes, that the world is multipolar, mutually dependent, both politically and economically. This is why I believe that multipolarism is not a hurdle in the EU integration process of the Western Balkan countries. On the contrary, multipolarism and EU integration are two processes that could complement each other, particularly having in mind that EU member states also cooperate with third countries far more than any Balkan country can. If this is not an issue for them, why would this be an issue for us? It is logical that we, just like them, are interested in cooperation with these third countries as well. After all, at least in the case of Serbia, these third countries we cooperate with support Serbia's commitment to the EU accession. Therefore, if the EU really wishes to have new member states from the Balkans, it should step up the enlargement process on both sides, both its side itself and towards the Western Balkan countries. The EU should harmonize its policy and action and improve even further its cooperation with the Balkans through various infrastructural and other projects. It should set up obligations and time limits for all participants in the enlargement process. We need to be more interconnected and cooperate in the interest of our countries and citizens and in the interest of Europe's future. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Presidente Obradovic.
Thank you, President Obradovic. One of the goals of our meeting is to be aware that if too much time elapses, as it elapses frustrates the intentions of the Balkan countries to enter. Now I'll give the floor to who is the President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Chamber of Deputies of Romania. Please, you have the floor, madam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable Chair, distinguished guests, it is a great honor and a great opportunity for us to be here in this conference. And thank you for Chair Fassino and his Foreign Affairs Committee to organize this meeting, because this conference, because this is a huge opportunity to share and exchange important experiences in how can we face the major challenges of this difficult period, a global pandemic and a huge recession. Of course, our target is to recover Europe from this crisis, but also to build cooperation and understanding between the member states and understanding between member states and not member states. Supporting the European and Euro-Atlantic course of the Western Balkan states, it is one of the major priorities of Romania's foreign policy. Romania's status as an EU and NATO member country, as well as its proximity to the Western Balkans, require a special reporting of Bucharest to the state on this region of the Western Balkan. From our point of view, there is concrete progress in regional cooperation, from infrastructure project initiative and measures. Part of Berlin process can be, I think, very proud, and that will bring visible improvements to the people in this area. We have to identify new opportunities of regional cooperation. Economic facilities and support for cooperation need to be stepped up. Of course, the mutual recognition of diplomas now adopted in Poznan is truly a step forward for 1,000 young graduates. If the big blow, the medium-term accession, is not achievable, many small steps are important, obviously in line with the rules and reforms of the rule of law. Developing EU policies over the medium and long term in order to tackle more effectively the challenge facing Europe has become a must in our point of view. At the same time, in a region marked by intense geopolitical competition, securing the pro-Europe strategic orientation requires strong political will from candidates, as well as concrete action in terms of reforms and attachment of the EU values. Candidates need to properly assume this strategical choice and communicate to their public about it. Implementing the necessary reforms for EU accession requires extraordinary efforts and cannot be achieved without bringing together in an inclusive manner all partners of society level, as well as the entire political spectrum. Citizen support for the EU is an asset that the EU needs to focus on. The EU financial and economic support, including to face the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the ambitious economic and investment plan announced last October, need to be made more visible so that the society acknowledge that the region remains a privileged partner of the EU. Strategic communication needs to be enhanced in order to counter disinformation, push back anti-EU narrative, and promote EU unity, solidarity, and solid engagement with the region. Our focus should remain on emphasizing the concrete and tangible benefits of EU integration for citizens' daily lives and make them more visible. This is even more important relating to the young generation, which is strongly supportive of European values and integration. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President Biro. Now the floor to the President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Commons. Great Britain, as well. The UK, as we know, is no longer a member of the European Union, as a member of the Berlin process, the country which has always had major influence on the Balkans, and therefore it is important to hear input from the UK Parliament too. So I'll give the floor to our friend Tom Tugendhat.
Non è collegato?
He's not connected.
C'era un problema tecnico, va bene, lo recupereremo, allora andiamo avanti. Ha la parola il collega Miloshovsky, che è il Presidente della Commissione Esteri della Camera.
Miloshovsky, who is President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament of North Macedonia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Fassino, and it's my privilege to send best regards to all the colleagues who are participating here and also all the other actors you have invited to join us in this workshop. I think it is very important because these days, as we can see, the European Union has very difficult headaches on internal issues, but also that is sometimes few weeks the region for the enlargement process. I was here with Sergio Pinto from Portugal and also from our colleague Monica Gregorčić from Slovenia. I hope that these two countries will find a way, but also your support and political diplomatic support from our other EU member states to put the enlargement issue higher on the agenda. But I understand that it will be not so easy for the time being, because usually the excuses are always stronger than the reasons to do something. The excuses not to do something or to postpone for the next presidency or for the next year became more or less a pattern of behavior when it comes to the enlargement process. It was very encouraging to hear from our colleague from Slovenia, she said the enlargement process should be a strategical decision of the European Union. And I do agree, this should be a strategical decision of the European Union, but at the moment it seems that there is no consensus within the European Union for the enlargement process, consensus about the pace of the process, about the model, about the new methodology, and of course about the political security, trade, economic implications for the European Union and for the Western Balkans. One day, hopefully, we will all agree and understand that it is a win-win situation for all the countries, including Serbia, including Albania, Macedonia, including Montenegro, of course, Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo, and what we can notice is that the countries that have stronger connections with the region, both in economical, political, and diplomatic and security exchange, they have a better understanding, or maybe even a bigger political interest to continue with this enlargement process with a stronger tempo. But on the other side, we have noticed that some other countries are not so keen always. So therefore, here now became a candidate European Union membership in 2009. and the European Commission. And since that time, 2009, 2010, I had the privilege to meet Mr. Stefano Sannino, who joined us a few moments ago. And I must say that both Stefano Sannino and probably the European Commission in general, they are favorable for the enlargement process, but they are not one and only decision makers. And regarding the region, I would like to underline that the European Union, what was mentioned by Commissioner Varhelyi, was very thankful, when I speak now on behalf of Macedonia, for what we have done during this first very big, strong wave of migrants from the Middle East, Africa, and other regions. Very strong wave of migrants heading towards the European Union. We are a small country, but we gave our utmost, and in a close cooperation with a few EU member states, we have assisted the European Union borders, although we are not members of the European Union, to address this issue in a manner that will be of an interest of the EU member states. So therefore, I just want to underline that no single country in the region has political or economic leverage to convince the rest of the EU member states that the enlargement process is important. But anyhow, I would like also to say that the stronger, the more stable and developed the region is, regardless whether we speak about Bosnia or Serbia, Macedonia, Albania, Kosovo or Montenegro, the bigger the benefits will be for the European Union as well. If this year we succeed to open intergovernmental conference as a country, and speaking on behalf of Macedonia, and let's hope that the same will be achieved by Albania, and I will be positively surprised, because at the moment and with the previous experience we already had, for us, or if unanimous convene these intergovernmental conferences. But if the success happens, I will repeat myself, we will be positively surprised, and I think it will be a step into a right direction, which will encourage both countries, which will further strengthen the credibility of the European Union and give us additional fuel for the reform process, which is not an easy one in the region. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie Presidente Milošovský. Allora adesso la parola.
Now I'll give the floor to Anastasia Vicinato, who is Secretary of the Defense Committee for Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Parliament of Greece. Thank him, and giving the floor. After this, we'll be having President Lekic, President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament of Montenegro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon from Greece. I listened to my colleague, Mr. Milošovský, and I would like to remind him that he represents the Parliament of North Macedonia and not Macedonia. So his wording about Macedonia is incompatible with good neighborly relations. And please, dear colleagues, I would be very grateful if all of you could use the proper term for our neighboring country. So this is an excellent occasion to reaffirm our commitment to peace and tranquility for our region, and Western Balkans are an essential brick of the European architecture of security. Besides, as you all know, the European Union has serious geostrategic interests in the neighborhood. We strongly support the full integration of all Balkan states to the European Union, under the strict conditionality set in the integration procedure. Above all, European principles and mutual respect among each state must be fully respected by all. Since the summit in Thessaloniki, you all remember that in 2003, my country, Greece, has been actively engaged and played a pivotal and leading role in the European integration of the Western Balkans. We are fully convinced that the future of the whole region lies within a stable, strong, and united Europe. Greece appreciates the efforts made by Albania to meet the prerequisites of the March 2020 conclusions and calls on it to maintain this constructive attitude towards the protection of national minorities that exist in her territory. Regarding Northern Macedonia, our country intends to monitor the full and in good faith implementation of the Prespa agreement, as I mentioned before to my friend Mr. Milosovsky, both in the context of the whole accession process. Moreover, we support the implementation of the acquis of each of the negotiated chapters. Concerning Bosnia and Herzegovina, we stress out the need to intensify the country's efforts on the basis of the 14 priorities set out in the Commission opinion on the rule of law, the consolidation of democratic institutions, fundamental rights, and the reform of the civil service. As for Kosovo, and in particular the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue process, we welcome its resumption. We look forward to concluding a legally binding and comprehensive agreement as soon as possible to resolve all the outstanding issues. We believe, dear colleagues, that in times of increasing global challenges and divisions, a firm, merit-based prospect of full EU membership for the Western Balkans is the Union's very own political and economic interest. In this context, and in order to keep the momentum, we look forward to holding the first intergovernmental conferences with North Macedonia and Albania as soon as possible, provided that conditions set in the Council conclusions of March 2020 are fulfilled. Additionally, we fully support the Portuguese presidency's intention to organize intergovernmental conferences under the new enlargement methodology with Serbia and Montenegro in the margin of the June's European Affairs Council. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Grazie, grazie.
Thank you. Thank you. We've always referred, and we do refer in our terminology to North Macedonia. I think that's the right name. Also because we've all appreciated the agreement between Athens and Skopje, which with this terminology resolved the problem which had lasted for 30 years. So we're all looking forward. And as the colleague, we are looking towards a rapid convening of the intergovernmental conference and to begin the enlargement process. Colleague Lekic isn't linked. I saw him a few minutes ago. So I'll give the floor to our colleague Ozuski, who is Vice President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Narodna Rada, the Parliament of the Slovak Republic.
Hello, dear friends, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks to the Italian organizers, but to all participants that allowed me to hear a lot of interesting information. And it's always the case that many people in front of you, before of you, will say a lot of you want to say. So I would like to clearly declare, being a member of parliament and not a diplomat, that Slovakia saw also, even if I am not representing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is since the beginning of their membership, of our membership in European Union, supporting Western Balkan countries on the way to European Union. Of course, they have to fulfill all the necessary steps, but on the other side, we should be fair and treat them accordingly to the fair play rules. Looking at Balkan, or more eastwards from Balkan, I see as a partly European Union mistake the fate of democracy in Turkey. We promised the Turkish Republic openly a future in European Union, but then we, in our hearts, perhaps not in my heart, but in hearts of many European politicians, we in fact never had been prepared to accept them, and it's unfair treatment. Now we can see the switch in Turkey, and that's why I am thinking that it's very important to keep the rules of fair play in treating Western Balkan countries, not to end as Turkey. And that's why as we did 10 years ago, a lot of support for our friends in Croatia. And now Croatia and Slovakia are EU members, and the whole story had a good result. But I have one specific remark concerning the newcomers or the countries on the way to European Union. All post-communist countries that had the tragic fate of decades of totalitarian regimes had to pass on the way to the European Union also the gate called NATO. All the countries, starting with Estonia in the north, coming through Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, up to Bulgaria, each country had to pass the NATO gate and become a NATO member. I would think that there should not exist any exception from this rule, because looking at the way of doing policy by Vladimir Putin, that is really a lifelong Tsar of Russian Federation, this way of policy cannot be in these terms, cannot lead us to accept any country that will not before entering European Union enter the NATO. Because any Russian embassy in a question of security and in other question to have the leg in the door of European Union is for me not acceptable. So we should treat all post-communist countries in a fair and equal way, and they shouldn't exist exception from this rule. That is the point I would, in my opinion, insist on, because looking at the new facts about the explosion in Czech factory, that is a new thing 4 or 5 days ago, even if 6 years old, shows us that the assertive countries that are, I would say, competing with European Union in the territory of West Balkan are not the countries with our values, with our seeing the way of democracy, and that's why it's a danger to have them on a territory of a country which we should accept to democratic European family. I wish all Balkanian countries, Western Balkan countries, good and hopeful way for the future. It shouldn't last too long, but on the other side, we should not make any exception, not to speaking about justice, about economy, about all the things that we had previously, we entered the European Union to pass, and they should go the same way. Thank you.
Grazie.
Many thanks. Mr. Zuski, you've mentioned some very interesting topics, relationship between membership of European Union, membership of NATO, and the need now that the process of European integration see all countries respect European standards, which are necessary in order to be part of the European family. This is a very important topic because on the one hand, we have to spur the European Union to be quicker, but the speed of the European Union is also determined by the reforms on the state of law, justice, information and protection of minorities are enacted in the various candidate countries. So there's a relationship between the momentum of the integration process and internal reform. And President Boulange also pointed out that this is a very important link which has to be maintained. I now see that we again have a connection with President Lekic, who's president of the Foreign Affairs Committee of Montenegro. We thank him very much for being with us, and also wish to thank him because I'm very personally glad to give him the floor because he was ambassador in Rome for a number of years, so he's a great friend of our country. And so in a spirit of friendship, I give him the floor.
Grazie a lei.
Thank you. I hope that
voce pacifica in ogni caso. E saluto onorevole Fassino con tre in realtà saluti, un saluto balcanico e uno mediterraneo e un
Mediterranean greeting and a European greeting. So it's the three components of our identity in Montenegro. Thank you for organizing this very important conference, which is encouraging for us in the Western Balkans, but which also has very useful content. There have been a number of interesting comments. I would like to avoid any stereotypes, but I'd like to say that the Western Balkan is an enclave. We look at us geographically, we're surrounded by EU countries, and we also consider ourselves European, geographically, politically, culturally, etc. We know, but we need to repeat that for the Western Balkan countries, there is a very clear strategic principle. We all want to be part of Europe, knowing that once you enter the European Union, it's not like it will be a fable, but we need to comply with many conditions, including, most importantly, the rule of law. The European Union has repeatedly stressed its will to complete the process of European integration. This this Balkan train is moving very slowly. It will have one phase of greater efficiency. I agree with Mr. Fassino, who stressed that we need we need to step up the pace in this area. We haven't said much about multilateralism, but the strategic autonomy is a notion which has become fashionable again. Previously, conferences decided multilaterally on ratios of force. Now the European Union is launching multilateralism as a democratic tool because the European Union obviously operates internally with these values, but also multilateralism on the international plane with NATO and with a number of actors. And it is in connection with these many actors, Mr. Fassino, you stressed, but also, dear colleague, at the colleague from Albania, Mimi Cordelli, stressed third-party actors who are not acting with multilateral values. They step in very directly. I'm thinking of Russia, China, Turkey, the United States, etc. And I wish to say that they can take advantage of this frustration, of this slowness to act of the European Union with Balkan countries. And this is something which we need to recognize. For example, currently, might be interesting, we have vaccinations in Montenegro, and there's we have so many things we can choose between. We can decide on the Sputnik vaccine or the Chinese vaccine or other European vaccines. And this is surreal, but it also expresses a kind of referendum on foreign policy. So I want to say that we are living in a very complex reality. And I wanted to say that I very much agree. I appreciated what Jean-Marie Boulanger said, who reminded us of something very important, that we need to respect European values, not forget European values, liberal values, secular values. And then he stressed also this fact that there's a tendency for countries to enter the European Union and then forget all these values. And for this reason, things are complex for the European Union too, because the European Union getting larger is getting weaker because it's more and more complex running it. But I'm speaking from the Balkans, Montenegro, and I must say that we have challenges, and it's a challenge for us to attain these European values, but also European Union, which I'm sure on Europe on the future, European future, will have a part which concerns the Balkans. So, President Fassino, we will take part in these multilateral forms, which are very important, as Antoniona said. The Adriatic-Ionian Initiative and the CEI. This is all very important and has practical results. But, and I close with this, the only consensus in the Balkans which has traces of traditional problems with nationalism, collectivism, historicism, which stay with us from the past. The only overriding value is the European Union. There is support for the European Union. The European should want to complete this process, and we'll work on this with great responsibility, and I'm sure that we'll become serious and responsible members of the European Union. Thank you, President Fassino. Thank you, President Lekic. And now we have the President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament of Kosovo, Aki Abadzi, to whom I give the floor.
Hello to everyone. Mirdita, good afternoon. President Fassino, thank you very much for organizing this important discussion in a very critical time, but a very good time at the same time. We're certainly all being challenged by the pandemics, which is has hit hard the whole globe, and with no exception, the Western Balkans and our individual countries. Yet, as we know, the times of challenges can also provide a good opportunity to rethink certain lines of policies and engagement, perhaps even call for a greater solidarity in Western Balkans, Europe, and the globe as well. So I would like to use the opportunity and say the condolences to all the families, individual families and the countries here participating for lost lives, and hopefully wish for a quick recovery of the out of the pandemics as well. However, I think we are all mindful that this is a time of challenges, especially with climate change and other issues, which I think should be the topic of our discussion moving forward, on how the Western Balkans can also take this opportunity and benefit from the transition on the new Green Deal that the countries around the world are preparing to reduce the CO2 emissions in order to improve the policies and the economic development from the perspectives of sustainability, public health, and preservation of the nature, which I think can be also a common platform of exiting some of the old ways of thinking in the Balkans in terms of showing a real commitment in terms of how Western Balkans can move forward. There is no question that the EU integration for Kosovo is a priority, is a top alternative, and all its institutions, especially now after the elections, a very good democratic, a very great and smooth transition that has happened with a consolidated majority, will have all its commitments in pushing forward for the EU integration process. Now, this is only one side. Our commitment is here. Obviously, I cannot agree more with Mr. Osowski that NATO membership remains as part of the guarantee of the security umbrella of, let's say, internal threats in the Western Balkans, but also external threats and other factors. So Kosovo is committed to the Euro-Atlantic integration and fulfilling standards moving forward as well. Now, there is a great also pleasure to hear Mr. Pinto from Portugal, but also the succeeding chair from Slovenia about the great enthusiasm and push and realistic view of the challenges. However, I should also say that from the Kosovo perspective, with all the commitments and positive outlook of majority of population, absolute majority population towards EU integration, we have to move at this point, after almost 18 years from the Thessaloniki commitment, to a more concrete prescription of what the EU perspective means for Kosovars. Therefore, I think, as you saw also from the sentiment of my colleague, homologue from Serbia, the past kind of sentiments do not fade away in Serbia. So decoupling the EU integration process of Kosovo from dialogue with Serbia, it will be a must, because it is a catch-22 to think that the EU integration of Kosovo can be seen from a perspective of the dialogue, when there is always in hands of Serbia to sabotage and prolong the process of Kosovo and keeping it in a kind of a back burner, while the chapters on the other side for Serbia has started to open. So I think critically, frankly, and very sincerely, we need to unpack the term of the perspectives of EU for Kosovo into a concrete enlargement strategy, new methodology, in order for citizens of Kosovo to have that confidence based on facts on how it moves forward. This does not by any means minimize the very great efforts and the support of the European Union towards Kosovo. Certainly is one of the biggest donor and support in Kosovo, but I think the pathway, the roadmap towards Brussels for Kosovo needs to go beyond the framing of the last several years. In addition to the fact that we are the only Europeans, truly geographically Europeans, with 1.8 million people that cannot move freely anywhere because of the visa liberalization process. Kosovo at times feels a collective prison because citizens cannot move freely without their fault. As we heard, Kosovo is considered that has fulfilled all its obligations. Therefore, I think EU should show unity in terms of moving forward and granting EU visa liberalization to Kosovars as well, in order to also provide greater clarity in terms of how the process of transformation of the Western Balkans from being a corridor of energy and refugees and others into an integral part of political, social, cultural map of the European Union. And that confidence to young Kosovars is extremely important to be done with the concrete and significant steps. Now, if you allow me in a very short way, I would like to also make several recommendations, since I believe that the paradigm has to change. We cannot ignore the fact that the process has been slow, also in terms of the relationships in the Balkans, not only from the skepticism of individual members of EU, but in shifting from the old paradigms of the 90s, where subordination and domination of individual countries have tried to put and undermine the partnership in the Balkans, which is necessary. Therefore, I think setting forward the Berlin process and the commitments that have been done in different summits that followed Berlin summit are very, very important. The common jointly infrastructure, interconnectedness, allowing freely for young and people, labor, moving free with ID cards needs to be a test for a political will of individual countries in the Balkans that go beyond words and rhetorics. As well, I think that in critical time, we are here to be supported in terms of fighting fake news and countering cybersecurity in the Balkans. Very often we have seen that by leaving it behind, it has been used as a place where a lot of fake news and cybersecurity threats have been generated. Therefore, I think EU should be paying close attention to this Achilles heel that has been left behind in the Western Balkans. Now, last, obviously, from where I come from, in terms of the gap and democratic deficit in the Balkans, we need a strong support for true civil society and independent media in order to be able to successfully fight organized crime, which is a joint problem of the Western Balkans, but also corruption as an endemic cancer of the countries in the Balkans as well. So paying focus to a strong civil society and independent media. I'm stressing out independent media will be a very, very important as we go along in transformation. My last point and concluding one is not only a threat to the EU keeping the Balkans out or keeping Balkans in Western Balkans in a slow pace of integration. We're losing the battle with the brain drain and labor moving out of the Balkans due to this slow process. We cannot afford to lose the battle with the brain drain. We need to keep the young population and people who will run our countries moving forward with the good prospects of the EU integration. That's why I think the clearer, more dynamic, and very concrete process is going to be needed as soon as possible. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Grazie. Grazie.
Thank you very much to the speaker for having made such important points. We are again connected now with the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Commons in the UK, Mr. Tom Tugendhat. Are you there? Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here.
With so many others today. I have had a huge pleasure in listening to many people talking about the importance of the Western Balkans this afternoon, and indeed of hearing a multiplicity of voices from so many different angles. And perhaps some people will be surprised to see the level of interest from somebody who has left the European Union on some of the states who look like they may be acceding to membership. I don't think that should be a surprise, because the stability of Europe and the importance of European cooperation in the Western Balkans, whether that's as members of the European Union or indeed as former members of the European Union, is something that applies to us all. We've all seen the potential spread of difficulties coming from a region as important and as rich with history as the Western Balkans, and we've all seen that our own forces have been very active in trying to build peace there since the end of the 1990s. Now, in years to come, there are going to be many, many different stories written as to how history in the Western Balkans went forward. And I hope that for many of us, that story will be written on the basis of cooperation, on the basis of trade, and on the basis of engagement. And that's where I hope very much that Italian leadership and indeed many other countries coming together in the European Union will be offering a bridge for countries like Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and many others in the region to come forward and indeed construct that opportunity. But I hope that that story will also be written with others, because it's absolutely true that other countries, some in Europe, like our own, and some outside Europe, like the United States and Canada and Australia, that have had such strong relationships with the Western Balkans, will be absolutely instrumental in making sure that that future is as positive as it really must be. So I'm not going to tire people's ears much longer than this, because I am not the expert, but there are so many others who are. But I can assure you that from a UK perspective, the commitment to and the interest in the region has not diminished. And our interest is very much on a stable European partnership, and therefore a very, very welcome entry of the Western Balkans into the European Union alongside many other partners.
Grazie, Tom.
Thank you very much, Tom. This is very important indeed, because Great Britain is involved in the Berlin process, and it is a country that always has had and will continue to have influence in the Balkans, in the Western Balkans, and in Southeast Europe. So your words are very important. I'll now hand over to Ambassador Castellaneta. You know that we have numerous regional cooperation bodies, and one of them is the Ionian Adriatic Initiative. And in fact, this was established in the early century, at the beginning of this century, and together with the other processes used there, the Berlin process, and the Central European Initiative, it is an important way for us to support these countries. It's a sort of a pre-accession support, however simple that may sound to you. In any case, Giovanni Castellaneta, who is the Secretary General of the IAI. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. In fact, I am
It's a pleasure for me to share the long-standing regional cooperation experience of the Adriatic Union Initiative in the Western Balkans region. For more than 20 years, you said, of its existence, the initiative, born in 2000 by the proposal of the Italian Prime Minister Amato and Minister of Foreign Affairs Dini, and with the strong support of the former President of the EU Commission, Romano Prodi, has significantly contributed to building trust, intensifying cooperation, integrating and adopting values and standards. Unfortunately, due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were forced to postpone the 20th anniversary celebration, which will take place in Ancona once the emergency situation is over. The celebration will give us an opportunity to exchange views on current affairs and issues of common concern, as to take stock of our achievements over the past 20 years, aimed at strengthening the AI as a regional forum committed to support European integration and sustainable development in the region. The Adriatic Union Initiative and the EU Strategy for the Adriatic and Ionian region, USAIR, play a special role as a regional organization in the process of European integration with the EU member state, as well as in promoting the sustainable development and economic growth in all its participating countries through concrete cooperation activities, starting with a process of bottom-up involvement of representatives of civil society, municipalities, universities, chamber of commerce, essential for each macro-regional strategy. For June 2020, the chairmanship of the AI has been held by the Republic of Slovenia, which brought forward an excellent presidency with a particular focus on green connectivity, tourism and culture, youth issues, digitalization, equal opportunities, and women entrepreneurship. The 17th Conference of President Speaker of the AI Parliaments took place 2 weeks ago on April 15, with a specific focus on the development of digital society and employment opportunities for younger generation. The joint statement adopted by AII Parliament speakers further recognized the importance of the EU integration and enlargement process of the countries of the Adriatic and Ionian Initiative as a key driver for strengthening peace, security and stability in the area. The parliamentary dimension is indeed a fundamental asset for the Adriatic and Ionian Initiative. A strict cooperation among parliaments gives indeed added value in the effort to upgrade regional cooperation and to make the AI and the OSCE instruments to get Southeastern Europe and Western Balkans again in the heart of the European policy when they deserve to be. Being the AI both an intergovernmental organization and a full member of the SAIA governing board, the AI is a privileged position to support the role of the Parliament within the framework of the SAIA. Putting aside the tangible outcomes that the OSCE is producing, let me say that this new form of cooperation, together with the traditional intergovernmental cooperation in this area, taking place in the framework of the AII, is crucial in bringing the two shores of the sea closer to each other, both in terms of institution and people. I would like to acknowledge also the help provided during the pandemic by the countries participating in the AII-USAIA and by the EU Commission, not only to each other, but also to their neighbors and towards the EU. Therefore, it is now time to create momentum and to leverage on this opportunity to further step up the integration process. The future of the Western Balkans is firmly in Europe. These countries still demand for a full and comprehensive integration. In few weeks, the 6th OSCE Forum will take place in Isola, the 11th, 12th of May, together with the Adriatic and Ionian Council. The Council will give us the opportunity to adopt the Isola Declaration and raise awareness of the common history and values, reinforcing a sense of belonging to the common European space. In this regard, I would like to congratulate Slovenia for a successful, dynamic and proactive presidency. This Isola Declaration will be soon adopted by Ministers of Foreign Affairs, 10 Ministers of Foreign Affairs, sends a strong message in terms of importance of the EU enlargement policy. Let also inform you about the fruitful collaboration with the Central European Initiative, two regional organizations which clearly share the same objective, to facilitate the integration and to promote economic growth and prosperity in the region through concrete and cooperation activities. In this exactly this framework that the Permanent Secretariat realized together with the Executive Secretariat of the CEI and with the valuable support of the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs, an initiative named Active Young Citizen for Sustainable Development in CII and the EII areas, to raise awareness in high school students on the UN Agenda 2030 and these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Let me conclude by wishing all success to the Republic of Albania, that from June 2021, we hold the chairmanship of the AI. Thank you very much, President Fassino, and all best congratulations for your mission.
Grazie, ambasciatore. Lei ha fatto riferimento al...
Thank you, Ambassador. You referred to ISAR, which is a very important instrument for cooperation among the Balkan countries, and which has an important function in some of the regional cooperation pillars. We still have, as you know, we will have the Foreign Minister Di Maio who will be concluding our meeting. We've foreseen the conclusion of our meeting around 5 o'clock. We still have 4 people to speak, and so I'll give the floor to these 4 friends, asking them to be kind enough to be concise. Now, Alexander Meresco, who is President of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Verkhovna Rada, Parliament of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, first of all, let me thank you for the honor to be invited to speak and to participate in this very interesting event. Ukraine remains committed to our European choice. Full EU membership is a firm strategic goal of Ukraine enshrined in our constitution. Ukraine highly appreciates the EU firm position on sanctions against Russia in response to its aggression against Ukraine. Russia's current blackmailing of Ukraine and the rest of the civilized democratic world is another confirmation of the need to keep pressure on the aggressor. Moreover, ongoing military escalation by Russia demands strong signal by the European Union on its readiness to increase significantly the price for Moscow should it decide to extend its aggression further against Ukraine. Today, Ukraine is determined to build on the progress of already implemented reforms, as well as to continue effective implementation of the association agreement. However, the objectives of the association agreement does not constitute our ultimate final goal in our relations with the European Union. Ukraine, as the European state, needs to see a European perspective pursuant to the Article 49 of the Treaty on the European Union. Ukraine is very much interested to join the discussion on ways to further development of Europe, including in the margins of the Conference on the Future of Europe. We believe that the discussion on the future of Europe should not be limited to the EU borders. Dear colleagues, previous year demonstrated that the Eastern Partnership requires stronger strategic vision, adequately updated incentives for the partners, and better reflection of the security challenges. The last turbulences in the Eastern Partnership region have been another proof of the need to rethink Eastern Partnership. I hope that the year 2021 will start a new page for the European Partnership. We expect the 6th Eastern Partnership Summit in autumn 2021 to give fresh strategic impetus to the initiative. It is important to develop new ambitious goals for the Eastern Partnership in the medium term. Dear colleagues, we believe the development of the security dimension in the framework of the Eastern Partnership is crucial to fill the security deficit that undermines both stability in the region and the momentum for reforms. Last year, Ukraine, together with Georgia and Moldova, stepped up with a number of joint initiatives and démarches on the Eastern Partnership that made trio approach in the Eastern Partnership visible. Given our common European aspirations and EU membership ambitions, we insist on the Eastern Partnership differentiation principle and the trio in-depth cooperation with the European Union in the areas of mutual practical interest. The Eastern Partnership should facilitate implementation of our European ambitions, not limit them. In this regard, we would like to see the Eastern Partnership rather as a Balkans-like pre-accession instrument, while perspective of the EU for freedoms for the interested partners as its strategic goal. As regards the association agreement with Ukraine, we have progressed a lot. At the moment, we need adequate incentives to drive further the European integration processes. In the view of the ongoing conflicts in the Eastern Partnership and hybrid threats coming from Russia, the new security dimension should be developed within the Eastern Partnership. Based on the respect to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the partner states. In particular, it should strengthen our collective efforts in fighting disinformation in the region. Resilience concept of the future Eastern Partnership deliverables suggested by the European Commission created a good ground to develop practically security platform within the Eastern Partnership. And a few words on the most pressing burning issue related to pandemic. Current pandemic has proven that public health preparedness and our social security cannot be limited to administrative borders. In the context of ongoing pandemic, we're particularly interested in getting access to the European Union Joint Procurement Agreement in the healthcare sphere. The last point which I would like to make, today we have the 35th anniversary of the tragedy in Chernobyl. And this lesson teaches us that there are things which we can combat only together. I mean, within the European Union and all European countries. And I hope that we'll be able to overcome the pandemic, economic crisis caused by pandemic, and we'll be also able to overcome the current Russian aggression. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Grazie, Presidente.
Now, Tommasugno, who's Special Representative of the European Union for Kosovo, to whom I give the floor, and then Mr. Castaldo.
Dear President Fassino, dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the Standing Committee on Foreign and EU Affairs of Italy's Chamber of Deputies for organizing this important workshop. I am addressing you today at a time when Kosovo's institutions are resuming their work following the early parliamentary elections and the election of the president earlier this year. For the last 2 years, Kosovo struggled with political and institutional crisis. This inevitably undermined the pace of Kosovo's European integration, putting EU-related reforms on hold. It is therefore our expectation that the coming period will be marked by institutional and political stability, allowing for a smooth and uninterrupted reform process. The new government, which was sworn only a month ago, is currently finalizing its program, reflecting the Stabilization Association Agreement priorities. This is, of course, a welcome development. The agreement, which has marked its 5th anniversary, necessitates a stronger focus and more effective implementation of its obligations, including contractual deadlines, in order for Kosovo to reap its full benefits. In regard to the EU-facilitated dialogue, I can say that the new government has been reviewing the previous agreements and declared its readiness to engage in the process. My colleague and friend, EU Special Representative for the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue and other Western Balkan issues, Miroslav Lajčák, is currently talking with the President of Serbia in Brussels. Later this week, USR Lajčák will discuss the same issues with the Prime Minister of Kosovo, Albin Kurti. For the Prime Minister Kurti, this would be actually the first official visit abroad, and it goes to Brussels. At the present stage, just like the rest of the world faced with the pandemic, Kosovo has been struggling with a health crisis and its socio-economic fallout. These areas have been declared by the new government as the most urgent priorities. Another top priority announced by the government is the rule of law, with a focus on the fight against corruption and organized crime. We share the importance of these priorities and have been discussing related EU support with our local interlocutors. As regards the provision of the vaccines, Kosovo declared that it will not use Russian or Chinese vaccines and would only rely on EU or US products. We have been working with the UN to secure deliveries under the umbrella of COVAX. First 24,000 doses were shipped to Kosovo a month ago. In parallel, the EU, with the facilitation of Austria, has secured fully EU-funded 95,000 vaccine doses for Kosovo to be delivered from May to August as part of the regional EU efforts on this issue. We have also provided and we will continue to provide support to Kosovo to foster economic recovery, including in the form of macro-financial assistance. At the same time, we have emphasized to the new government that the reforms in the area of rule of law sector and other areas should not be conducted in a disruptive manner that would reverse the achievements achieved up to date. It is a key that changes are instituted in a way that is conducive to consistent progress. The support for the EU remains strong in the general population of Kosovo. According to recent surveys, close to 90% of people in Kosovo are in favor of an EU-oriented policy. As my predecessor, Commissioner Varhelyi, I need to mention that the EU continues to face Kosovo criticism for pending visa liberalization, which is locally perceived as an unjustly delayed decision. In this context, while emphasizing that the decision is now in the hands of the member states, following the positive assessment of the European Commission and the European Parliament, we have continuously encouraged Kosovo authorities to remain committed to reforms and to avoid any backsliding. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie. Adesso ha la parola il vicepresidente.
And now I'll hand over to the Vice President of the Parliament, the European Parliament, Mr. Castaldo. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you indeed for having organized today's discussion. It is important to have this kind of exchange so that we can revitalize the integration process, as you yourself have said and others have said. We know that we have internal reforms on the rule of law, accountability, transparency, and acquiring the acquis, in fact, and then the European institutions, how they react, how they respond. Now, so many points have already been raised, so let me just say this. Now, it is important to have a bit of self-criticism because we don't want to repeat any of the mistakes that have been made by Europe over the years. Now, the Union undoubtedly has supported the countries, the Community for Energy, the Community for Transportation, the Adriatic-Ionian initiative, which has been mentioned many times, and then investment plan for the Western Balkans. These are all very important steps that are taking us in the right direction. But we must remember that some mistakes have impacted an important asset, and that is trust. We must never weaken this trust in the ruling class nor in the public opinion of the Western Balkan countries. Now, what about managing expectations? Often in Europe, we haven't been careful enough because we've destroyed some expectations, not only for the ruling class. They're the ones who have the necessary tools to understand the complex dynamics that are involved. But we've also weakened the confidence in the public opinion. I remember when President Juncker recognized how difficult enlargement was during his mandate. It's important to acknowledge difficulties, but oftentimes this is devastating for the public opinion because the message is a way of saying that the enlargement process is not seen as being so important. It's downgraded somehow. And then in February of 2018, they were again underscoring the strategic value of the enlargement. And then we had the declaration on the candidates. And 2025 was the date set, not as a deadline, but as a way of positively encouraging, constructively encouraging candidate states. Now, we don't want to exaggerate with expectations, of course, because there are lots of uncertainties and there have been tensions, unfortunately, and I think those could have been avoided. So this is why we need to identify a second dimension. Now, often we tend to feel overly burdened by expectations linked to enlargement. So we don't need deadlines. We just need to make sure we can boost confidence on the process, because when efforts are made, then there have to be benefits somehow. And in fact, this hasn't always been the case over the years. At times, there were huge delays in opening negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia, for example. Now, thanks to the Prespa agreements, they've managed to overcome some disputes. In any case, we know that there is a stalemate because of the Bulgarian vote. We've heard about this numerous times today. And of course, it isn't only a question of implementing the reform processes, but it's an internal European dynamic at times, because this is the beginning of the process and not the end, not the conclusion. So there are bureaucratic tie-ups and delays, and that's why at times everything is slowed down, and there is a loss of confidence in the public opinion vis-a-vis the European perspective. Now, this is a way of discouraging reforms that are needed, and unfortunately third parties can interfere because there is a void that is created, and they step in to try to fill that void. Now, my third point is the lack of inclusiveness in the integration process, and candidate countries feel this, and we've said this many times. Even the Thessaloniki Declaration, we said that all the Balkans should join the European Union. In the European Parliament, I am waging this battle, and we want all of the countries to be part of the next conference on the future of Europe, and they should all be on equal footing with the European Union member states. That would, of course, encourage them to commit even further. And my final consideration has to do with the response to the pandemic. In the region, the countries have only been able to receive the doses under the COVAX program. We know it's been inefficient and very slow. 4 months after the launch of the vaccination campaign, the European Union hasn't provided enough vaccines. Unfortunately, now things seem to be a bit more encouraging. I've had to ask the commissioners, the competent commissioners, to step in and to do something, to take action. We want to avoid frustrations. There are some very difficult moments, and we must deal effectively with the future members of the Union. They must be seen, in fact, as future members and not as third countries, or even fourth, as someone said, with a bit of irony. Now, with these mistakes, we always have to consider geopolitics, Russia, China, the Gulf. We know that they are influencing their political, economic, and cultural influence in the region, and they're investing resources, and they have all sorts of interests, and they are filling voids that perhaps we have created. They don't have the same thing to offer to them the way the European Union offers integration. I fear that if we fail to act, there will be great disappointment, and we will not be seen as a reference, as a term of reference. Even with regard to the vaccine geopolitics, we know that our image is becoming weaker, our credibility is weaker and weaker. So we need to change the situation. We have to make sure that this doesn't result in alienation. The 6 countries have been making progress with regard to the acquis, and we don't want this to be jeopardized because of some difficulties. So we must proceed with the Albania and North Macedonia negotiations, and hopefully it'll be possible across the board to reach a consensus, because in Tirana, Podgorica, Pristina, all over, I see many youth who have a European dream, and they have to be included in the general discussion. I think that the European Parliament is ready to fight for this, and hopefully it will continue to be a driver for the integration process, to revitalize this process. So we have to make sure that we don't create a void, a vacuum. We have to continue promoting the fundamental rights in these regions, because otherwise it'll be our fault. And I think that would be the worst historical mistake that we could possibly make, because we would not be meeting a challenge that is essential for security, stability, and growth, and for the overall European project. Because the Western Balkans are not at the periphery of the Union, but I think they are at the very heart of the process. Thank you very much. And I already see our Minister, Mr. Di Maio, who is ready. We have one final contribution.
Tenere nei tempi e il rappresentante.
I'd like to beseech him to take time, and the special representative of Europe for Bosnia, Joan Sattler, who's listened till now, and I thank him for his patience. So give the floor to Sattler and then Di Maio.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and warm welcome from my side, also from Sarajevo. And I'll be short because it's been a very long afternoon. I think it's been clear from the interventions this afternoon that there is only one future for the Western Balkans, and the future is within the European Union. The main question for us here around this table, I believe, is how long it would take and how can we make sure that the countries will remain committed while we are in this process. And I think we ought to be creative. We ought to be coming up with new ideas in having the commitment of the countries of the region in going forward. I think the new methodology, which was adopted last year by the 27 member states, is a good step in the right direction, being more flexible, putting chapters together in clusters. And when one country fulfills all the necessary conditions in one cluster, the country can then graduate to also be part of the European Union policy in that very sector, and also be able to get more funds from that very sector. I think this is an important step forward. I believe also it's important to focus on regional cooperation much more. A very good step last year by the Sofia summit. All 6 countries in the region committed to develop the so-called common regional market. This must not be a permanent training ground, a permanent waiting chamber for the European Union, but it's a very good training ground indeed for qualifying later on for the European Union, basically living the full freedoms among the 6 before going forward on the European Union path. When it comes to Bosnia-Herzegovina, very quickly, it's been a latecomer, as we all know, for different reasons. 2016, we had finally the application for membership. 2019, we got the opinion from the European Commission. And I'm happy to say that last year in 2010-20, it was possible to move forward on a couple of issues. One, the national war crime strategy, very important, which was adopted last year. Secondly, the Stabilization Association Parliamentary Committee with the European Parliament. And thirdly, and probably the most important step, finally, we got agreement on Mostar. Mostar, as you might know, didn't have local elections for more than 8 years. So now we have, since the end of last year, a city government. And this makes me hopeful and optimistic that also other issues can be solved. 21, I believe, is a year which brings opportunities. We have heard Mr. Softic saying before that there is one strategic issue in Bosnia-Herzegovina around which citizens can unite and also political parties can unite, and this is the European Union membership. And I think this is the one thing we must not lose sight of, and therefore I think what's on the table is that we have a non-election year. We have, secondly, a stronger focus from the European Union, but also from the United States. From the European Union, only in the last, I would say, 2 months, we had visits from 5 European Union foreign ministers, including also Minister Di Maio, who was here and where I had a chance to meet. We have an upcoming debate at the Foreign Affairs Council on the 10th of May on the region, especially also on BIH. And I think we should use this year. We should use this year for BIH to speak and solve especially the issues around electoral reform. For us, this absolutely also means the European Court of Human Rights judgments. Sejdić Finci and all the other human rights judgments need to be implemented. We also need to speak about functionality. This is a major issue for BIH, which is holding the country back. So this is on the agenda as well of course, as was here stated by many speakers before me, rule of law. We will continue full steam to work on rule of law reforms. So in a nutshell, 21, I believe, is a good chance for the region, especially for BIH. We have more attention. The European Union has the best offer on the table, including, of course, also last year on fighting COVID. When it comes to BIH, we put together a package of about 300 million euros only for Bosnia-Herzegovina. This includes more than 200 million in macro financial assistance, also to help for the budget in this very difficult year. Vaccines were mentioned before. I'm happy that next week we'll see the first delivery of vaccines through the EU scheme. And with this, I hope we get into a better course for the remainder of the year, so that we can get back more normalcy into our lives and into the region as we go forward. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and back to you.
Grazie. Grazie a tutti.
Thanks to all of you. We've been almost on time. And now we have the Foreign Minister. Foreign Minister is currently in Abu Dhabi on mission, and so we thank him very much for being with us on a link up to conclude our discussion, where there were representatives, presidents of the Foreign Affairs Committee of 6 countries from the Balkans and 12 more countries from the European Union. So it was a very wide-ranging and a valuable discussion, very useful, I think, to continue our political initiative to support an acceleration of the enlargement process of the European Union and the Balkans. So I give the floor to Minister Di Maio. Many thanks, President Fassino, and dear presidents of Foreign Affairs Committees and parliamentary representatives. My greeting to Commissioner Varhelyi. Hello, Oliver, and eminent guests. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to see so many well-known faces, which I've met in my travels. I'd like to congratulate Mr. Fassino for organizing this meeting. Even though I'm in the Arab Emirates, I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to for the presence of Commissioner Varhelyi. I'd like to stress Italy's support for the enlargement of the European integration in the Western Balkans. Before making some comments, I'd like to say that one of that I've noticed in the Balkans is the great presence of young people who look to the future with curiosity and hope. Romano Aron, speaking of the problems of Europe, wrote that when a society loses interest in its future, it's sentencing itself to death. A tired Europe needs young people also to respond to those who say that Europe no longer has a soul or is losing it. Keeping the doors of Europe open to the Western Balkans is an opportunity to feel the blood of these young people in our veins. The president of the, I've noted the importance of parliamentary democracy and international relations. This is particularly important for the Western Balkans. As Mr. Fico said initially, Italy has contributed to promoting the parliamentary dimension of various fora for discussion, which we've supported to support government initiatives. In particular, I'm thinking of the Central European Initiative and the AIA, the role of parliamentary representatives, the Isola meeting, as a confirmation of the vitality of this interparliamentary dialogue. Members of Parliament promote greater understanding between our countries, promoting among citizens a shared view of Europe and its future. And in this, we see the felicitous the choice of this date was for today's meeting. The conference provides us with a possibility of discussing the future of Europe and the priorities we need to pursue and how to strengthen full and effective citizenship of Europe. I'd like to invite the Western Balkan countries to take an active part in this discussion. Their future lies in Europe, and the Union will never be complete until all are members. We need to complete the strategic design launched more than 30 years ago, the day after the fall of the Berlin Wall, to reunite the European continent. I belong to a generation born under the European flag and who grew up convinced that there could be no future outside the European Union. The risk, however, is that the new generations may have a disenchanted gaze on this Europe, which has lost momentum and sometimes seems remote from its citizens, particularly the young. They, however, hold the positive energy which Europe needs in order to become more sustainable and resilient. Italy is organizing a special event because of this to the young, and we'll be involving your young people from the Western Balkan countries because their enthusiasm, I'm sure, will provide momentum for the Europe of the future. Every time I travel in the region, I am struck by how the boys and girls on the other side of the Adriatic feel European, a sea which does not separate but unites Italy and the Balkans. I feel that they want to have the same destiny as their peers in Rome, Paris, Berlin. And I also noticed their frustration and their fear of being left behind. There could be nothing worse for the European Union to waste these dreams. The lack of clear road to European integration overlaps with the problems which scattered on the road of moving towards a better achieved democracy. But the European Union is very important in driving these reforms. This disillusionment leads to a wave of migration from the region, and which has to be responded to because it affects the young. In particular, this loss of human capital runs the risk of undermining the future of the Western Balkans. The challenges to face are a great many. Renewed effort and political commitment on the part of the young people and the parliamentary bodies of the countries. We need to strengthen the rule of law, promote effective battle against corruption, and ensure an efficient public administration, relaunch the economy using digitization and environmental transition. We need to adapt institutions and laws to European standards, but in particular, internalize the values and principles which underpin the EU. The pandemic has made these reforms only more urgent. The impact on the economic and social area have been drastic. Just think of tourism or the effect on remittances from abroad, which contribute considerably to the local economy. In the battle against COVID, the Western countries have been able to rely on the support of the European Union with a package of up to 3.3 billion euros initially. And Italy appreciates the work of the Commission, in particular Commissioner Varhelyi, to gather the requisite resources. We know that we must assure that Balkans are not left behind in the vaccine nation campaign, which is essential in order to guarantee a full recovery of the economy. We understand the dissatisfaction because the limited amounts of vaccine which have arrived in the region. We've also identified the improper activity of some producers, but I want to stress the attention from this point of view the EU gives to the Balkans, showed by 16 million being allocated for the purchase of new doses in the area. The legitimate expectations of the Balkans go well beyond the response to the pandemic. It's very clear, and Italy will continue to voice the aspirations of the area. We will not rest until we make these concrete steps towards Europe. For Italy, the Ionic and Adriatic areas are of strategic importance. We feel that the capacity of the Union as a global actor would emerge strengthened by stabilizing a region which is highly interconnected with our country, and therefore work without sparing energy to give credibility to this. The European Union has decided to give itself a new methodology. President Fico was saying this, in order to make the process more credible, less bureaucratic, and the candidate countries have to be incentivized and encouraged, and in their reform path. For years, we've been hearing of fatigue in member states with regard to enlargement. Without underestimating this feeling, the true question seems to be the progressive lack of confidence of Balkan countries in view of a goal which seems harder and harder to grasp. And therefore, we should not give in to what could be defined as a negotiation fatigue. We're crossing a phase which is very complicated in international equilibrium. Other countries are trying to consolidate a role in the region. Therefore, it's up to the European Union to give concrete signals, particularly beginning the official negotiations with Albania and North Kosovo by convening the first intergovernmental conference. We cannot delay this step further. And currently 1 year has already elapsed from the decision taken by the European Council, which Italy contributed intensively to give a green light for the negotiations in this area. And it's also important to encourage Serbia, opening a few chapters for negotiation at the next June meeting. We accept in Parliament the presentation of the reform of justice, and we hope that Belgrade will be able to advance rapidly in this area. We also hope that Montenegro will be able to proceed regularly now that all the chapters have been opened. I visited Podgorica a few weeks ago, and I was very glad to see the determination of the new government and new parliament. We need to support this positive development. Emblematic for Europe is the case of Kosovo, whose citizens, the only ones in Europe, are still looking for liberalization of visas, even though the countries respected all the conditions set. Cases you're paid. And I would like to end with Bosnia-Herzegovina, which has a special place in the hearts of we Italians. 25 years have elapsed since the weapons stopped shooting, but at times we have the feeling that this country continues to fail to find peace. I would like to express my firm appeal to all the political forces in Bosnia-Herzegovina to leave behind them the ghosts of the past and to look to the future, a future of cohesion, concord, and reconciliation, which can fully implement the deserved aspiration of their finally united citizens. And I trust that the whole of the Balkan area will realize the ambition of entering a Europe which is increasingly united. So it is an ambition of ours too, if we work all together in the same direction, both inside the European Union and in the region. This achievement may be available to hand. Parliaments are decisive in this process, and therefore I encourage you to continue in your dialogue, and I thank you again for this initiative, President Fassino. You can count on our firm support. Thank you, and I wish you a very fruitful continuation.
My thanks to the minister who's followed us from Abu Dhabi, and as you heard from the minister, he's reiterated Italy's commitment bilaterally and multilaterally, and in particular in the European Union. In fact, we will support with determination the enlargement process to include the Western Balkans in the European Union, and we will support any necessary initiative to step up the process. Now, the minister said that we need to resume the negotiations with Serbia and Montenegro, and we need to speed up the overcoming of the difficulties which have resulted in a stalemate in connection with the intergovernmental conferences for North Albania and North Macedonia and Albania, and we have to work on a European perspective for Bosnia and for Kosovo. And the minister was very clear when he said, I think we all agree, when he said that we have to work hard to make sure that what we created from Dayton to now is more and more consolidated and strengthened, and that the integration process become an institutional framework for the region. We should avoid any temptation to go back to the past, to feel nostalgic for those orders that used to exist. And when they did, in fact, they were the causes of conflict and war. So no more of this nostalgia. We've come to the end of our meeting today. We've had a very rich debate, and I must thank all of my colleagues, the chairman, the chairpersons of all the standing committees. And we know that on the one hand, the European Union and its institutions must shoulder the responsibility to speed up the process. But we know just as well, and the leaders of the candidate countries for the enlargement process, of course, must know that if the European Union speeds things up in those candidate countries, they must also speed up the reform processes that are underway in fighting corruption, in establishing the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary, the media, and protecting minorities, because these are the reforms that the European Union is asking for. Not because they want to create obstacles, but in order to join the European family, we must have the same standards. They have to be consistent and harmonized. So we need to speed up the negotiation processes. We need to speed up the internal reforms. These are two areas that must run side by side and that mutually influence one another. And this is where we must focus our attention, because these two dynamics must be faster, be as swift as possible. And one final point that I wish to make before closing has to do with the important role that parliaments can play in this scenario. We all know that the European institutions have a primary responsibility, but governments also have a fundamental role to play. And in addition, parliaments have a role, because parliaments represent the society even more widely than a government does. So when we talk about mobilization, we mean providing an even stronger impetus, momentum for the enlargement initiatives to include the Western Balkans in the EU. Let me give you an example of what our parliament does. In the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Italian Parliament, all the political parties, all of them, are on board, those who are in the government majority and those who are opposition parties. They all agree unanimously that we must speed up the enlargement process to include the Balkans, the Western Balkans in the EU. So this is a unanimous position in the Italian Parliament, and it makes the government action even more stronger and determined. So I think that in all parliaments in the Union, we need to do likewise. We need to provide this impetus, this drive, this commitment, because the more parliamentary consensus we have, then the easier it will be for governments and European institutions to take swift action. Now, we can wrap up our meeting today with a short statement. I have a draft, and tomorrow you'll receive the final document. In fact, I've already received some suggestions to supplement this draft statement. So thank you to everyone again. And I just wanted to say that we must continue with our dialogue. With COVID-19, unfortunately, we have been forced to use technology. Now, it is nice because we can have shorter meetings, perhaps. However, we all do hope to be able to meet in person again. We wish to go back to a more normal situation, and therefore I hope I will able to receive you in Rome very soon. I hope you can all come in person, because this way we can continue with our dialogue, not only through technology and digital platforms, but also by gazing in one another's eyes and working on this shared commitment that we all have. Again, thank you very much. We will continue with our dialogue, with our parliamentary diplomacy. Our Foreign Affairs Committee will continue to have relations with all the Foreign Affairs Committees of the Balkan countries and the EU countries. Therefore, we shall continue to bolster this dialogue as we have over the past few months and as we've done today. I wish to thank the embassies as well, all the Italian ambassadors who have helped us in organizing our meeting today. And I also wish to thank the ambassadors of the countries that are here in Italy and that have assisted us in organizing today's work. I thank our interpreters, our technical staff, all our secretariat, and the staff of all the foreign affairs committees that have worked hard on making our meeting possible. So my warmest thanks to all of you. I see this as a wonderful experience. We are richer, we have more ideas, we are more determined in our work, and we have more hope. Thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.